Hello everyone. This is a commentary over Bungie's Halo campaigns. This is Halo 3. If you have not seen the previous commentaries discussing Halo 1 and Halo 2, I would advise you to watch this first, as many of the points I plan on making in this video rely on arguments I established there. Halo 3 released to the Xbox 360 on September 25th, 2007, launched just weeks after BioShock and months before Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. It is difficult really to describe to you what an insanely good time it was to be a gamer. As a senior in high school, my ability to do basic schoolwork in this era had flown out the window. Working at a mom-and-pop hardware store for $5.15 an hour, I was finally able to purchase the Xbox 360 in 2006. Though Elder Scrolls Oblivion would be my first game for the Xbox 360, it would be these games, including Halo 3, that would help to cement the console finally as the next generation. Like many consoles before it, the Xbox 360 had its usual share of sports and racing titles that launched alongside the console release, but it would take some time before major players entered the new environment. The early titles like Gears of War and Elder Scrolls Oblivion helped to showcase not only better graphics, but high-definition screens. Going from standard definition to full 1080p resolution was just a more profound jump in visual quality compared to our current jump from 1080p to 4K, despite the difference in number of pixels. Granted, Halo 3 was not rendering at nearly that resolution, but seeing Halo 3 on the Master Chief Collection now at 144 Hz and at a full 1080p is just mind-boggling. However, back when I was 17, more than perhaps at any point in my life, I was stunned by the graphics of these games, and so I bring this up to say that I have not quite had that same realization now, and I think that likely has to do with the many diminishing returns of graphical improvements as the years have gone on. This helps to set the context through which we talk about Halo 3. For a long time, Halo was unmatched on the Xbox, and it took developers the better part of a decade just to compete. With Halo 3, we suddenly have the end of an era, not just for the Halo franchise, but for gaming in general. Suddenly it was a consumer's market for experiences, not just with Halo. Of course, Microsoft had secured plenty of games throughout the years, from Max Payne to Morrowind, but none had the fidelity and feel of a Halo game. Halo 3 was different. It was a mega launch that is rare nowadays, but immediately after its release, it submerged into the release dates of so many others, to the point that Halo would never quite mean the same way to me, or to many others, again. When looking at Halo 3 at a bird's eye view, this is the first thing I wanted to mention. As we get closer to the title for our commentary today, I'd like to start with a little housekeeping. I will be playing Halo 3 on heroic difficulty, with the fog skull turned on. This is an effort to bring back some screen space for the purpose of this commentary. I will also be playing with scoring turned on. In Halo 3, Bungie implemented a new scoring system for the campaign. Along with multiplayer, players could now earn medals and achieve a certain score based on speed and violence of action at any given Halo level. Each mission had with it a par score and par time, par being a similar word used in the game of golf to indicate a certain amount of hits that is generally assumed a player will take to complete that hole. Scoring could be influenced as well by skulls, which have been made an explicit option occurring in the menus, and could be switched on and off at will, rather than needing to be found every single time a player booted up their Xbox. I think this is all a great system, and adds much needed replayability beyond the sandbox of Halo combat. Seeing this retroactively applied to Halo 2 and Halo 1 gives me hope that other things will eventually come to pass in the Master Chief Collection through proper development or through mods. The introduction of the scoring system is why I am playing with it turned on. In Halo ODST and Halo Reach, you will once again see it turned off. This will be the first game where I do not have to give a prelude as to what graphical choice I will be using and why. Halo 3's original graphics hold up, and I suspect will, for the most part, age like fine wine. This is in no small part due to the return of a vibrant color palette. With Call of Duty and Gears of War working with a muddled and desaturated set of colors, Halo was going back to the well. As an edgy teenager, I remember being disappointed by this, but now, as a smarter adult, I am deeply grateful in Bungie's confidence. For now, that is all the housekeeping I have for the making of the commentary at large. It's time to talk about Halo 3. The first combat encounter is a great one for new and returning players. It starts with such a wide difference in height. Gone are hallways and multiple floors. Here we have a natural environment with rock outcroppings that make jumping on and off them not only encouraged, but sometimes necessary. I spoke in Halo 1 about how little a player needs to jump. Juxtapose that with Halo 3, and Halo 3 feels as though it understands verticality in combat encounters a little better. Grunts wade into the water unaware of the Marines who lie below, and the Chief up top, with the Arbiter mixed in. Everything in this first encounter leans towards the player's favor, which makes it a great introduction to the new calisthenics, enemy behaviors, and weapon features. The two grenade types finally receive a third in the form of the Brute Spike Grenade, and a fourth in the form of a Flame Grenade. As a result, the player can only hold 2 of each type. I think that 4 of each type was always an insane amount of grenades, but it was also fun to spam grenades in a close quarters setting as a way to clear out enemies. Throwing the grenades has never felt better. It seems to have less of an arc, but more force, making sticking targets with the spike or plasma grenades far easier. The sense of verticality continues in the next phase of the set piece, as a Phantom comes in quickly to drop off soldiers. The new Phantom is introduced well here, as we stand on level ground with it to take in its new features. An amalgamation of the old dropship and Phantom, the new Phantom features doors, but Covenant still drop out of the sky. Suspending the doors into the air helps to protect them more than dropships in the first game, but it also allows a veteran player to think ahead and claim a vantage point. The Phantom dispenses with 3 shade turrets in favor of 1, but offers manned plasma cannons by grunts along the sides, similar, I suppose, to contemporary Black Hawk helicopters used by the United States military. This allows a little more agency by both the Covenant and the player. If a player feels threatened by a turret, they can either hide, or they can put a couple rounds into a grunt. Watching a grunt's body fall limply from the Phantom is always satisfying. I think seeing this compared to seeing a destroyed shade turret makes the game feel more dynamic and alive. Speaking of dynamic and alive, Phantoms now have an internal health system as well, and can be destroyed if they take enough damage. This is a nice change of pace, and can add an extra challenge to veteran players in co-op, but also works wonders for in-engine experiences that feel cinematic. Below, the Covenant stand no chance against the player with grenades and fire from Marines barreling down on them, but in the distance, the fight continues deeper into the jungle. Brutes with brute shots fire a revised version of the weapon, one that does not fall with gravity, but instead fires straight like a cannon. Its blast radius and the visual noise it creates can disorient players, and in certain settings, the brute shot encourages more nuanced behavior from the player. For instance, if the player places their back against a wall, the brute shot can leverage the blast radius of the shot to damage the player more consistently. So once again, jumping is encouraged to mitigate the effectiveness of the brute shot. Plasma fire from pistols and rifles now seem to fly faster, and the kneeler has been placed back into its rightful place as a non-dual wieldable weapon. The fighting is faster and meaner, but the Master Chief's shields seem to recharge faster as well, so the overall pace of close quarters combat feels frenetic. On Heroic, my senses were piqued. In Halo 3, we periodically see Cortana appear in the Chief's mind as a kind of residual experience, perhaps of past events or past trauma. The Spartan's past is one that was described heavily in books, but has been altogether avoided in the games. Here, the connection between Cortana and the Chief is likely to remind the player that they used to be melded together for much of Halo 1 and Halo 2, but she is absent in Halo 3. I am less concerned with the attempt to bring this disconnect to our awareness, and more concerned with how it was achieved. The way it was done by slowing down the player's movements, as well as the world, in non-combat encounters, and by blinding the player with brief images of Cortana, sort of akin to subliminal advertising. I think this was a poor decision. Halo achieved its glory by being a beautiful marriage of machine and nerve, much like the Chief. The connection of the player to the controller was unparalleled until that moment in 2001, which is why any sort of attempt to take away action from the player is a risk. Often in the late 2000s and early 2010s, this was egregiously overused in the form of QuickTime events. Here it is a far more minor version of that problem. Still, in replaying the series, these moments stick out more and more. The game on PC runs so smoothly now, with such high frame rates, that there is less of a technical limitation to impede the player from enjoying Halo 3. Keep in mind that much of Halo's story was told in voiceover as the player encountered environments. Occasionally set pieces would play out in the background. This is a foregrounded moment in contrast. I think Bungie's approach to story was more efficient than this, so to me this is a dip in the series' ability to tell a story. What's worse is how little Cortana has to say. Cortana at one point suggests that the Master Chief would do anything to complete a mission, even watching her die, which is an absurd line. Both Cortana and the Chief are professionals, and have always been aligned on exactly what needed to be done. Even if this was the internal turmoil inside of the Master Chief's head, why bring it up now? People who have played Halo 3 know that this conflict is no conflict at all, and has little bearing on the plot of the game as a whole. What I mean to say is that these moments could be removed entirely, and little changes. The next set piece is an attempt to pick up the Chief, Johnson, and the Arbiter, and the Marines, but they are blocked by patrolling Banshees. Across the river, we can see Jackal snipers. Once again, we have the high ground, to quote Ben Kenobi, but here we will eventually have to commit and drop into the set piece to continue fighting. From there is a slight uphill climb to the dock on the far side, which continues into the jungle. Skilled players will use the best of both worlds by picking off grunts and brutes at a distance with the battle rifle or carbine. Both of these weapons maintain most of their qualities, with the carbine getting a brighter tracer, and the battle rifle with what feels like a tighter firing rate on its burst. Both weapons are formidable medium-range weapons, but I tend to prefer the carbine. In this particular moment, the enemy is far away enough that I switch to the battle rifle for certain enemies due to its tighter spread. But throughout the campaign, if I had to choose, the semi-automatic carbine works for me. As you can see, the cinematic spectacle of Halo is more front and center this time around. Pelicans not only pick up and drop off, but are a part of larger events, both taking fire and dishing it out. Halo 3 manages to place cinematic experiences more front and center for the player to make them feel like they are part of a larger story. Luckily, the combat has seen major improvements, as have the level design, so I'm a happy camper. But I have a feeling that Bungie felt good about this as well, coming from Halo 2. The next area is a great contrast. Here we have a jackal alley of sorts, only the environment is far more varied in height, and the jackals are not all carrying beam rifles. Not only that, but the Arbiter is rolling with the Chief. Compared to Outskirts and its jackal alley, the end result is night and day. The jackals here are far more noticeable with their ocular device that glows in the dark jungle. They fire carbines instead, specifying only a couple of beam rifles, which makes them far more palatable when jackal snipers appear in groups. On the whole, this is a much better version of the encounter than in Halo 2, so we can say it's an improvement. It is also a nice change of pace compared to the previous action encounters, so it works up to vary the experience. As this is an infantry-only level, Sierra 117 has the pacing and expectations of something like Pillar of Autumn or Cairo Station, but it is packaged in a much bigger box. The next set pieces further exemplify the verticality. If you pay close attention to how each set piece begins, you notice that, for the most part, the player is given a vantage point for what the geometry looks like that they are about to encounter. Granted, for a couple of these, there are not too many options, but we have to remember that, in Pillar of Autumn, at most there was 2. In certain encounters in Cairo Station, that number was 2 as well, but it was less often. Here in Sierra 117, we have occasionally 2 pathways, and sometimes 1, but what is fascinating is how much larger each fight scene is, and sometimes they blend 2 and 1 together. But here I, again, stay high up for as long as possible with a beam rifle, which has changed not a bit, unfortunately, between the 2 games. Now is a good time to mention the AI of Halo 3, which in my opinion is far looser and more agile than in previous games. In this scenario, it's nice to see them attempt to push from below, even if they are at a disadvantage. It's something that would never have happened in Halo 1, and this context would likely not have existed at all in Halo 2. The AI in the later Halo games is exemplary, and I will touch on that perhaps more in their final game, Halo Reach. But they always present a challenge that feels tough, but fair. In many of these encounters, I lose shields and feel close to the edge of death, but each time there are enough tools that can help me get out of a jam. In this set piece, you can really see me scramble through several weapons. I change weapons much more often in Halo 3 in general, and I don't know if this is due to ammo supply issues, or if it is due to the fact that Bungie really nailed the weapon balancing. Each weapon feels viable in strict circumstances, and because the game is so fast and kinetic, the changes in weapons had to reflect that. At this point in the Halo series, there are many weapons, and it was a huge task for Bungie to make them all not only distinct in look and feel, but as a weapon that a player would want to choose in those circumstances. You can definitely feel, as you watch me play, a slow erosion of my playstyles from Halo 1 and Halo 2. As much as I want to play the long game, the game pushes against this tactic, and I end up doing much more breaching and close quarters work. You may also notice that melee attacks are far more effective as well. It was very frustrating for melee attacks to not kill in the first 2 Halo games, but here not only does it work, but the feedback is glorious. Watching a grunt's back armor fly off in green gaseous mists, or watching a jackal shield disintegrate, adds a great deal of implicit satisfaction to the combat. One would have hoped that over time these unspoken facets of reactive gameplay with good feedback would have been heavily explored in the decade following Halo 3. Sadly, that would not come to pass.
See how they bait their trap? I will help you spring it.
Sierra 117 is quite a short mission. Halo 3's average how long to beat on the website is 8 hours, 1 hour shorter than Halo 2, and 2 hours shorter than Halo 1. Halo 3 sacrifices dead time for constant stimulation, and I think if Bungie wanted an action-packed finale, they nailed it. The last set piece of the mission once again sets us up at a high vantage point, so as to take in the massive environment. We have two sides of a facility, and on the far side, Sergeant Johnson has been taken prisoner. We are once again given time to dictate the terms of the opening engagement, and I hang back to pick off jackal snipers. One of the great aspects of this set piece is in its space. It really feels like an adaptation of the hopes of Halo 1, brought on par with Bungie's cinematic aspirations as well. The player must cross a bridge to get to Johnson, but there are multiple levels. This is the first of a couple of moments where Johnson plays damsel in distress. I don't know why that is, just remarking on it. As the player crosses, there are several rooms which can be used, but are not required. As a result, the set piece feels spacious. Because I have played this mission before, I am less exploratory, and instead use this space as much as I can towards our tried and true strategies of the past. Here I cannot rush through, so I maintain distance and work methodically. This is the first occasion where we see equipment. Equipment was a more effective inclusion for multiplayer, as it helped to add a twist to the dynamic of combat. It was a certain wild card that could turn the tide of a fight if used correctly. There are various forms of equipment, but most have an area of effect. The green cloud continuously recharges shields, while a blue electric one drains them. A bubble shield creates an area of safety, which you have likely seen already. Another one serves as a kind of flash grenade, showcasing the power of Bungie's exaggerated lighting system. There are others, even ones of invisibility and invincibility. It should be noted that certain pieces of equipment do not quite translate into the campaign. For instance, the green cloud does not recharge Covenant shields, but it does recharge the players, which effectively means that the Covenant are helping the Chief murder them. There is another piece of equipment that can disrupt a player's motion tracker, which does not make sense to use on the Covenant, or Flood, because they do not rely on a motion tracker. It is strange in the campaign that they would even allow such pieces of equipment on the field of battle when they only work on multiplayer. But overall, I like the idea of equipment, as it presents a contingent set of circumstances, like weapons, that can alter the feeling of a fight. This equipment would be internalized in the form of an ability system for the Spartans in Halo Reach, in the form of swappable abilities, as well as loadouts used in Firefight, in order to compete with Call of Duty's success. Though Bungie worked diligently to innovate from the inside out, what separates Halo in my mind is its emphasis on building games from the outside in. Vehicles, weapons, equipment. They are all found out there, not as an inherent set of options that a player chooses before going in. This made the work difficult, because a carefully balanced game required looking at the entire chessboard, rather than simply the pieces. This aligns with current problem-solving in Battle Royale games, where careful attention is paid to massive maps on offer, both their large expanses and urban streets. How much cover, how little, and how much verticality all contribute to a setting that can either be incredibly rewarding, such as the Warzone and Apex Legends maps, or can be quite terrible, as Battlefield 2042 fans realized when they played those maps for the first time. The mission ends with a bang, and all manage to board a Pelican in order to reunite with Miranda Keyes at the Crow's Nest. In my mind, Sierra 117 is the best of all the starting missions of Halo. It skillfully prepares the player by giving them distinct advantages, but then challenges them with a far more open set piece than anything we saw the Pillar of Autumn and Cairo Station do. It has more cinematic gameplay variety, does so in beautifully colorful shades of green, and prepares the player by introducing equipment and with balanced combat encounters.
Scratch two!
Headed? Are we ready? I got shotgun. Anything's better.
IFF confirmed. Contact is Pelican dropship, Kilo 23, over.
Roger that. What's the word, Kilo 23?
Sierra 117 on board. Request priority clearance. Over.
Deck's yours. Come on down.
Sorry for the tight squeeze. Tell the commander her ace is in the hole.
Check it out. No way. A Spartan?
For real. You better not be.
No, man, he's here. We're gonna be
Where did you
all right.
find him?
Napping. Out back.
I'll bet. It's good to see you, Chief.
Likewise, ma'am.
Let's get you up to speed. The Prophet of Truth's ships breached the lunar perimeter. smashed what was left of the home fleet. Terrestrial casualties from the subsequent bombardment were extreme. Truth could have landed anywhere, but he committed all his forces here, East Africa, the ruins of New Mombasa. Then they started digging.
What about Halo?
We stopped it, but only temporarily. Now the Prophet of Truth is looking for something called the Ark, where he'll be able to fire all the Halo rings. If he succeeds, humanity, the Covenant, every sentient being in the galaxy.
The rings will kill us all.
Ma'am, I have Lord Hood.
Patch him through.
Good news, Commander Keyes?
Good as it gets, sir.
So I see. What's your status, son?
Green, sir.
Glad to hear it. Commander's come up with a good plan, but without you, I wasn't sure we could pull it off.
Truth's ships are clustered above the excavation site, and his infantry has deployed anti-aircraft batteries around the perimeter. But if we neutralize one of the batteries, punch a hole in Truth's defenses...
I'll initiate a low-level strike. Hit him right where it hurts. I only have a handful of ships, Master Chief. It's a big risk, but I'm confident.
Hell, not again.
Emergency generators, now!
Shielding failed. They're down and charging.
As soon as they're up, re-establish contact with Lord Hood. Let him know...
All of you vermin, cowering in the dirt, thinking, what, I wonder, that you might escape the coming fire? No, your world will burn until its surface is but glass, and not even your demon will live to creep, blackened from its hole to mar the reflection of our passage, the culmination of our journey. For your destruction is the will of the gods, and I am their instrument.
Cocky bastard just loves to run his mouth.
Does he usually mention me?
Give the order, we're closing shop.
Ma'am?
We're about to get hit.
All personnel.
The wounded.
Defense Code Alpha
We're getting
1,
all of them
prepare for
out.
Immediate
I'll
evacuation.
have to carry him myself.
Ma'am, squad leaders are requesting a rally point. Where should they go?
To war.
Looking at Halo 3 on paper, and by paper I mean the Halo manual, one could immediately see that this game is iterative of the previous Halos, and not a revolution, like we saw from the movement from Halo 1 to Halo 2. New weapons that appear in the manual are the Spartan Laser, the Brute Spiker, and the Spike Grenade. The manual, as per usual, does not include all of the new features, such as the Brute Gravity Hammer, the Prowler vehicle which replaces the Spectre, or the change in Flood. We do see the inclusion of a missile launcher for emplaced weapons, a new type of Covenant turret that is still called a Shade Turret, and veteran players know that a new Brute vehicle known as the Chopper will also make an appearance, as well as the Mauler shotgun, despite not being in the manual. But there are no new Covenant enemies. Due to the massive narrative changes in Halo 2, the Chief and the Arbiter will be fighting alongside elites, and against brutes as a result. The brutes do undergo a massive change, but that lends more to my argument that Halo 3 does not attempt to rock the boat too much on what has been established. Halo 3 is instead a game that feels more dynamic and alive, where the player seems to be entering scenes in media res in such a way that makes the world feel embodied, present, and real. The same holds true for the Master Chief's abilities. He is still able to dual wield and board enemy vehicles, but the veracity of the first ability is far more downplayed in Halo 3. That is because while our Spartan has not changed, the rest of the world has. Bungie went back to the well also, by addressing Halo 2's level design, getting back some of the first Halo's open sandbox charm. In my mind, it does not quite reach that first game's novelty and mystery, but let me be clear, the third Halo campaign far surpasses the second, in almost every way. Why this is, I hope to explain as we go along. That being said, I should also make clear that I consider the sandbox of the combat of Halo 3 to be better than Halo 2, though still not quite perfect. But Halo 3 is also bombastic, with many longer engagements and far more vehicle set pieces, and because of that, dual wielding cannot keep up. From this vantage point, I'd like to speak to what you are about to see in comparison to the previous games. When I mean that the game is big, bold, and brash, I suppose I'd better explain myself. Many of the set pieces in Halo 3 begin with the player at a high point to take in all the size of a combat encounter. This feels intentional. Bungie was also pushing the limit of how many assets and objects could be in each level. Physical objects abound and will go flying often. A big game, the biggest, will also see me using the most area of effect weapons thus far. The previous games were far more infantry focused, and so precision weapons and small arms fire were dominant. In Halo 3, the infantry had to keep up with the amount of vehicles in certain engagements. Rockets, brute shots, fuel rod cannons, missile launchers, and grenades are everywhere as a result. This is also the game where the player spends the largest proportion of their time in vehicles. New vehicles like the Mongoose and Hornet add to the collection of human vehicles. The Brute Chopper and Prowler I have previously mentioned as well. Bungie attempted in Halo 3 to leverage all it could of its combat, with the end result being perhaps the biggest campaign yet. After Halo 3, Bungie would have to radically rethink Halo's form so as to improve graphical fidelity, and that meant sacrificing the size and scale of Halo's fighting composition. Halo 3 has also improved massively in environmental detail and variety. Jungles, deserts, snows, forests, all with weather effects and with dynamic natural details like flurries, running water, and footprints in the sand. All of this combines to make for an incredibly replayable campaign level to level, with some notable exceptions. While the game manages to switch places with Halo 2 in its level design, it also seemed to switch places with its emphasis on narrative. Bungie ran into a distinct problem with its engine by 2007, where much of the animations and faces look quite terrible. Even in 2007, I remember the cartoonishness of the cinematics clashed quite heavily with the melodrama of its tone. Many of the action sequences in these cinematics lack weight and heft. Every aspect of this would be solved in Halo Reach, but compared to Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, released in the same year, and its apples and oranges. However, I would gladly play the Halo 3 campaign over the Call of Duty campaign any day, and that is because, in my opinion, Bungie leaned into what it did best, by providing an incredibly engaging and fun combat sandbox from one mission to the next. The second mission of Halo 3 is not quite up to our new standard. At first glance, Crow's Nest features several of the qualities I have asked for since the Silent Cartographer, such as doubling back, and the reuse of certain places so as to maximize engagement and lower exhaustive development time. Unfortunately, much of the connective tissue of the level in the form of hallways and large tunnels can make the level very confusing to navigate. Even now, playing the game, I made incorrect trips both up and down certain sections of the map that I had to backtrack on. The encounters where action does occur, however, are acceptable, and each one makes the world feel alive. By Halo 3, there is a reverence not just for the Master Chief as Spartan, but for the past work that he has done. He is acknowledged not only by fellow humans, but also by the Prophet of Truth, who obviously has a new voice actor. I prefer Halo 2's voice actor, but honestly it makes little difference. In this cutscene we get to see the hideous faces in all their glory. Like I said, I care less for these, and when playing on my own outside of recording for a commentary, I always skip cutscenes. Crow's Nest feels like a blend of several thematic ideas. We have the Pillar of Autumn with the concept of being invaded and boarded. We have the feeling of the Rebel Alliance against the Imperial troops in the Battle of Hoth from The Empire Strikes Back. And we have a return of a bomb. In Cairo Station, we returned a bomb to the Covenant. Here the humans are using a bomb to cover their tracks as they exit. The Master Chief moves from set piece to set piece in an attempt to save human lives in this close quarters reimagining, perhaps of that second Halo mission. But I also think, overall, Crow's Nest fails to capitalize on our new knowledge from Sierra 117, and does so with far less beautiful textures. This is not to say that the combat is not engaging. We have a couple of moments here to talk about. One of those is the hangar, which bears close similarities to the hangar from the Arbiter mission in Halo 2. This time, however, the open space for the player to maneuver is much higher and wider, where the player can enter the rafters up to a control room. That said, this is another case of waiting for enemies to arrive in a firefight setting. Luckily, this type of fighting was not something we saw in the previous mission, and won't be something in the next one, so it is impressive how sparingly it is used compared to Halo 2. We're given some deployable cover equipment, and given some turrets. In Halo 3, both of the human and plasma turrets are even more useful for its ability to be removed from their tripods. This gives the player the chance to take the turret with them, but it has limited ammo and lower accuracy. For now, the prospect of using a turret, while so exposed, works only for a small moment, but once I get the Covenant attention, it's best to keep moving. Once the Pelicans begin to be unlocked from their holding cells, we can move on to the next set piece. The next major combat encounter to mention is the reuse of drones. Grabbing an assault rifle, it proves itself modestly effective against the drones, but no more or less than any other large rifles. The drones feel far less mobile than in Halo 2, and generally fly in tighter swarms together, which makes it easy to take them down. It's much easier in this scenario to find pockets where drones are not present, unlike in Cairo Station, where finding cover was extremely difficult. If you noticed, Some of the doors have to be activated to be opened. We have not had this quite like this before, and I suspect it adds some interactivity to the world so that the player can be more aware of where they have been and where they need to go next. It's a nice touch, but I don't think it does enough to make each area distinct. Keep in mind that, even in Pillar of Autumn, there are markers for where things are along the ship floor. Why did they not use color and lines to demarcate where to go next? Considering the beige and brown color palette of the walls and ceiling, colored lines would have popped very well in contrast, just like Pillar of Autumn. I don't know. It's interesting what lessons Bungie learns and which ones they forget. Another set piece to mention is the connective hallway where brutes are brutalizing enemy marines. These hallways are nice enough, but apparently there is a ventilation shaft system above the catwalk. For years, I did not know that this even existed until playing through on PC for the Master Chief Collection. This boggled my mind, and is a great tool to get the drop on the brutes, and you can do so even more effectively with the Brute Gravity Hammer, a new weapon for Halo 3. It made sense to be able to use a form of Tartarus's weapon, and the Gravity Hammer is a truly inspired addition. The Gravity Hammer not only deals damage, but it exerts a force, which is very cool when used to deflect grenades and rockets, and even vehicles by a skilled player. Here the feeling of dominating with a Gravity Hammer is pure enjoyment, and it reminds us that Halo is meant to be fun. Many of the changes in Halo 2 felt very sweaty, more in keeping with what we would see with Destiny's player versus player environment. In fact, much of the fun with the Halo series reaches its apex in Halo 3. Halo ODST and Halo Reach would strive for a more somber and self-serious package. Here we should probably talk about the shotgun. In Halo 1, the shotgun was introduced at the perfect moment and represented the ideal solution to taking down the Flood and Covenant at close and mid-range. In later games, as the use of dual wielding made the short range more of a debate, and as the distance of Halo 3 broadened, suddenly the shotgun lost its original appeal. Halo is not Doom, so it should be no surprise that the shotgun would not be thought of as an essential weapon. But it is surprising to me how the shotgun and assault rifle never quite got their mojo back, and in the assault rifle's case we have to admit that it may never have had it to begin with. But that's for veteran players. This comparison is obvious. For beginner players, seeing them use an assault rifle feels natural. Because of the fire rate and close range of the shotgun, many beginning players commit either too soon or too late, and so use the weapon incorrectly. Having the shotgun neutered across the games may have been for the best, as many of the weapons in the Halo arsenal would have been made obsolete. Still, I cannot help but feel a sense of disappointment. Another interesting set piece comes from brutes with jetpacks. We have a far more brief elevator ride than anything in Halo 2 to bring us to a set piece that breathes a little more space into Crow's Nest. It's not much, but it's a nice method for enriching the variety of the level. One interesting aspect that I did not know where to place, so I'm placing it here now, is this. Out of the 3 campaigns thus far, Halo 3 was the one where the amount of cutting I had to do around my voice lines was the least, as in, the amount of physical gameplay I had to work with was the shortest. In trying to think about why this was, several possibilities arose. First, as a veteran player, I knew how to resolve an action scene, and this had a more profound effect than in previous games. A veteran player can know all they want about Halo 2's Jackal snipers, but on Heroic, a single shot adds more time. Another possibility is that I died far less in Halo 3 than in Halo 2. For example, Halo 1 features a slower pace in both movement and story compared to Halo 3, which keeps the brisk movement in infantry and vehicles of Halo 2, even if there are more cutscenes. Another reason is how destructive the weapon layout is in Halo 3. Enemies are not only easier to shoot, but our arsenal has been stacked so heavily with so many weapons that there is bound to be some heavy-hitting skill weapons lying around at the end of each engagement. Again, another answer is most certainly the amount of times the character is halted for exposition or loading in Halo 3 is dramatically reduced compared to Halo 2. It still occurs, but in minimal places and scenarios. There are far less elevators and gondolas, basically. Finally, there are places where a player can cheese scenarios, and I will explain those as we go along. On average, the Halo 3 campaign has the highest aggregate mission tiers by the community on tiermaker.com, and I think that makes sense. Halo 3 attempts to create a bigger scale in nearly every way, if it also loses some of its attempts at variety. While the first Halo has a hook for each mission, Halo 3 simply takes the opportunity for bigness and jams it up to 11. Neither ODST nor Reach can quite keep up with the number of enemies, vehicles, or size of spaces of Halo 3, and why that is will be very interesting to speculate on. But just know that Halo 3 continues in a long line of trilogies that seeks to end it with lots of big fights. The Master Chief and the Arbiter will be working together, and the Arbiter takes the place of the second player in co-op. Now would be a good time to mention that, for the first time in the series, Halo now allows up to 4-player co-op, with Player 3 and Player 4 taking the role of elites. Elites were playable enemies in Halo 3 multiplayer, though there was always speculation among players that the elites had larger hitboxes and were thus not nearly as wise a choice of player model. Unlike Halo 2, Halo 3 dispatches with the idea of death and co-op setting the team back to the last checkpoint. 4-player co-op was the perfect decision in my opinion to capture the sense of size and scale of the first game. Though some areas do not feel as big as Halo 1, Halo 3 manages to pack in many more enemies, all simultaneously interacting on stage that makes it perfect for co-op. If I had had my way, the world of shooters would have embraced expanding co-op in all games, rather than competitive multiplayer, but as games became more demanding on hardware, as well as more complex, I can see why competition was a more expedient choice. Perhaps in an alternate universe, there is a tactical Spartan game called Halo Republic Commando, which features hundreds of enemies on screen and 16-player co-op. You're welcome to speculate as well. Because Halo 3 is such a refinement of the formula, rather than a complete revolution of what Halo is, I will have to be a little more detailed in my analysis when evaluating Halo 3. The first reason is that Halo 3 is deserving of this sort of attention, but also because at this point, there are so many callbacks and repetitions of combat encounters in the third game that it is worth exploring the trilogy thus far, in order to see the kind of conversation that Bungie was having with its community. One example is the re-inclusion of the assault rifle back into Halo 3. The assault rifle has been lowered to 32 rounds, but presents a far tighter spread in accuracy compared to its original in Halo Combat Evolved. The assault rifle has a far lighter sound when firing, but can still put a lot of rounds downrange. I must admit that I do not like this version of the assault rifle. I think it lacks distinctive punch, but given the right circumstances, it can tear through fleshier enemies like drones. It won't stand a chance against the Flood, so it will be dropped for newer, punchier weapons. One of the downsides of playing this series is seeing weapons that you used to love go out of favor. This is true for the assault rifle to make space for the SMG, and true for the shotgun to favor dual wielding. Another weapon to fall out of Bungie's favor is the Magnum pistol. True, this version is far punchier, but it lacks the range due to missing its optical zoom. Its fire rate is now much slower, and its mag capacity is also lower, so in a way, it rests in a middle ground between Halo 1 and Halo 2's Magnum pistol. One example of the refinement concerns the Brutes. Now that elites have gone by the wayside as the main warrior leader class that the player fights, Brutes must now cast themselves as an equally engaging and rewarding enemy. They have received a shield type of their own, which looks like physical armor, but will disappear once enough damage has impacted them. This helps my critique of Brutes in Halo 2 when I considered them to be bullet sponges who lacked a hit feedback system. Brutes have a much more complex moving, evading, and mounting system compared to elites of the past, and will strike, roll, jump, and shout in far more alive ways than before. Again, Brutes existed in Halo 2, but now they have achieved their final form. Jackals now appear to be even faster than in Halo 2, and their shields are much brighter and easier to identify. More importantly is the idea that Jackals also manage to wield the carbine rifle as much as the beam rifle, a godsend for the player. By the end of the mission, the Chief is told to go back and reactivate the bomb after the Covenant have defused it. After fighting heavily and activating it, the Chief must hurry and escape the facility. Throughout, we have had even more visions from Cortana, which has perhaps made the player go from befuddled to frustrated, especially considering some of the cringe-inducing dialogue about this place becoming your tomb, and that overwrought writing we've come to expect from the 2000s.
This place will become your tomb.
Savo Highway is a great mission. It's bombastic, features great Warthog encounters, gives the player plenty of room to maneuver, and makes a great case for 4-player co-op. Compared to other levels, this is the first one which allows the player to stretch their legs. We have had Warthog encounters before, and vehicle events in general, so the goal of talking over this level is to evaluate choices in this mission in particular compared to others. To do this, I'd like to enlist the help of a feature new to Halo, and that is the theater. Savo Highway begins in the broken ruins of our human headquarters in Crow's Nest, after having barely survived a blast. With Marines, you enter multiple Warthogs, and we see here a new variant of Warthog that is just a passenger type, with more spaces for seating. One might imagine a massive Halo experience of 32 versus 32 players in multiplayer, where in a different world, this Warthog variant would have been useful for transporting players across vast distances, but here in the campaign it feels a little odd. The tried and true Warthog makes a comeback, with an accurate Gatling gun that Marines and Spartans can both drive and shoot. In 4-player co-op, Imagining two separate Warthog vehicles, each with a player in the driver and gunner seat, was unprecedented, but luckily Halo 3 manages to justify this kind of situation with its sense of scale. The first encounter occurs still in the tunnels, with fairly flat terrain and high walls so as to get the player back into the driver's seat. The Warthog handling has not changed too much since its Halo 2 alterations, which I think were effective. The satisfaction of both driver and gunner murdering Covenant is made so by only small enemies present so far. This continues for our first outdoor section, which is spacious in a U-shape surrounding the downed Phantom, where we can see Covenant maintaining a checkpoint of some kind. This is a great driving experience for the player, who has plenty of space to maneuver, and great for the gunner as well, as most of the enemies are collected together into a small point. The driver can risk being aggressive here, without too much of a downside as well. From here, the road bends to the right, and we face two simple Jackal snipers, which gives the Chief access to a sniper rifle which they can use skillfully in later parts of this mission, so as to protect the integrity of the Warthog. From here, the path bends back and forth, from left to right, and we have two separate groups of Covenant, one a smaller gravlift tower, and the other a more formidable group of Covenant, and another downed Pelican. Not a Pelican, a Phantom. Whoops. One of the brutes has a fuel rod cannon, which can be dangerous for its damage and its force of impact. A veteran player may get out of the Warthog and snipe the brute, or a clever driver will constantly switch their direction to evade the fuel rod cannon. With far less space to maneuver, it can be difficult. The bends here are much narrower, and there is a newer issue of the verticality of climbing up and down the hillside. The third major section outdoors is a circular arena with an outer circle that slowly descends into a watery center below. Along the outskirts, we have a couple of shade turrets placed in foci of this maybe slightly elliptical circle. We have Jackal snipers and towers along the back wall and even behind the wall. So in a way, we are putting everything we've seen together. The brutes do not have fuel rod cannons, but they do have brute shots, which have plenty enough force to overwhelm a Warthog's traction. The snipers can be deadly if a player drives slowly or does not drive at all, and the shade turrets present a problem in two key locations. If a player were to drive in a circle, the backside of the circle may be difficult to navigate. If a player opts to drive more in a figure 8 by going through the center of the circle, the player risks being in the kill box and will present an easy target for the shade turrets. The geometry of the level showcases a rocky outcropping that stretches over the center water, which can be leveraged to gain verticality over the scenario, and is often what I use when planning my way through. A player may, rather than methodically fight, opt to drive straight through. It is possible, but difficult. Overall, a great combat experience. The final section of this first outing with the Warthog introduces us to the dangerous power of the Brute Chopper, a new vehicle which maneuvers a big motorcycle and features some high monkey bars like a chopper. The chopper is a very dangerous counter to the Warthog, as it fires concussive rounds that knock over a Warthog, not to mention that a chopper can obliterate a Warthog by ramming it. Luckily, a chopper can only fire in the direction it is facing, and cannot move laterally, so the Warthog can evasively dance around a chopper to mitigate these problems. Choppers aren't the only problem in this final set piece for the first half of the mission. Brutes with fuel rod cannons, as well as gravlift towers, dot the road ahead, not to mention that debris can make maneuvering the Warthog even more difficult than the previous set piece. We have, again, an overhanging outcrop that allows the player to have the advantage over some enemies, only this time a shade turret is hanging out up there too. As the player nears the energy barrier that separates us from the rest of the mission, we can see drones coming through. Again, placing enemies just before exiting is not my favorite tactic, but we have not had a scenario of drones and vehicles before, so I appreciate the combination. I think overall this Warthog fighting is truly spectacular. It is designed so well with the geometry, and each encounter offers strengths and weaknesses for certain player behaviors. If replaying this, 1, 2, 3, or 4 players may approach this in so many different combinations, the existing of scoring and skulls, and you have what amounts to be a challenging set of driving set pieces that offer many permutations. Looking at the series as a whole, I feel comfortable saying that this is the best Warthog experience. One counter-argument I think you can make is that the later Halo games were less interested in the Warthog as transit and method of exploration, and more just another aspect of combat. If you feel strongly towards the former, then using the Warthog on Silent Cartographer can trump this experience. But if you want to fight with the Warthog, this section takes the cake. What was so great about the theater mode was not just its community aspect. Players could make clips of campaign and multiplayer and post them. Remember that YouTube was still in its infancy, and smartphones, like the iPhone, would be released in 2007, but would not reach ubiquity until 2013. So Bungie managed to build a community through its file sharing system. But what was really great was the ability to take clips and eventually make Halo what people wanted. People made whole television episodes using Halo's theater system, like Red vs. Blue from Rooster Teeth, but there are many others as well. It opened up a whole new avenue of enjoyment to Halo systems. A replay system for Call of Duty could have been implemented, but the combination of weapon systems is far more restrictive, so perhaps the point of such a theater system will be more difficult to justify. In Halo, players have so many options that a truly athletic skill could change the course of a game in big ways, or could produce situations that were downright hilarious. The theater system is more than just the sum of its parts. It represents a promise from a developer to a community. I will speak plainly. This kind of commitment does not exist anymore. If it does, it exists in indie gaming spaces that does not hold a candle to Bungie's heft and influence. At this point in 2007, after moving down the highway, we were forced to abandon our vehicles for an infantry-focused scenario as breathing room between now and the next encounter. This infantry section is a large one, with the player intercepting an ongoing conflict between humans and Covenant. Again, the living feel of the world really comes down to the little details like this. There is ample cover with debris everywhere. I think also, to bounce off what we saw here in Sierra 117, the use of hills and verticality here is really something. We haven't really seen this extensively since Halo 1. Here, the Marines have the height advantage. If the player goes right, they go behind the Covenant, but are cut off from friendly forces. If they go left, they can reach the Marines much easier, but must face the Covenant while they have more cover. Going through the middle offers the least amount of cover, is the lowest point in the scenario height-wise, and that can hurt when brutes with jetpacks start jumping into the fray. Notice that the game does not force you to make a decision, but instead gives you options. The player will have to, once again, stand their ground against reinforcements. In Sierra 117, we had the final set piece before Pelicans arrived. In Crow's Nest, we had the hangar before a Pelican could leave. Here in Savo Highway, we have this junkyard defense scene. As you can see, despite the expansive geography, Bungie still had to lean on certain aspects of their formula. Knowing the player is defending in this encounter, several pieces of landmine equipment lay nearby, which work well on both infantry and vehicles. Placing it before enemies arrive can be difficult, so players should work fast. There is a sniper rifle, which has not changed much, and does not include a night vision feature. One of the interesting differences, I suppose, in level design is how little night missions there are in Halo 3. Most of the game is bright and colorful, save for Floodgate and Cortana, which to my mind are not nearly as dark as some other missions from Halo 1 and Halo 2. In my mind, the middle games lack a solid grounding for night missions that Halo 1, Halo ODST, and Halo Reach more than make up for. Halo 2's night missions lacked color compared to the first one, and appeared drab, but Halo 3's color and contrast, though not as vibrant and saturated as Halo 1, would still be a disservice to hide them in the dark. Once the player is dispensed with the enemy, the Chief is given another Warhawk from a Pelican, but a player can also come away from the encounter with a Wraith if they happen to play it smart and board the craft. The Wraith achieves its final form in Halo 3, with a co-pilot seat for a plasma turret. Besides that, the Wraith remains largely as great as it has before. The next section features vehicles and shade turrets, with the ability to maneuver through extremely tall rock outcroppings. It isn't the best we've seen in the series, but it's serviceable. The following section, however, is a sort of nightmare for the player. Below the continuation of the highway, we have a circular path that is massive in size, perhaps the largest fighting arena we've seen in Halo 3 so far, and one that far outpaces most if not all of the spaces in Halo 2. On top of the highway, a couple Wraith tanks fire down on the player or players. Below, infantry and choppers will mow down the player if they are not careful. So here we have the Wraith doing what it does best, aggravating them into multitasking. Even in co-op, this encounter can be challenging on heroic and legendary. Just when the player thinks they have the drop on the enemy, Phantoms can arrive to drop off more choppers. There are shade turrets on the incline towards the highway as well, and on the far side, if a player is not careful, they can drive off a cliff. A player might be interested in skipping this section, but with Wraiths blocking the exit and it being uphill, this can prove difficult. So far, Bungie has done a decent job making skipping through sections of Halo 3 difficult. So, it's a fight, and what a fight it is. The final fight of this level concerns following the highway to another energy barrier, which, destroying it, ends the mission somewhat awkwardly, though it does bring us into the view of the Ark, the Covenant ship that Truth was looking for since the end of Halo 2. It's kind of amazing how little story there is going on here, compared to the dynamics between the Covenant and Halo 2. This final set piece has shade turrets, brutes with jetpacks, brutes with heavy weapons, and is on the whole a fairly difficult encounter. There is enough cover throughout, but the narrow way the fighting is compared to previous encounters makes it difficult to leverage the player's ability. So here the strategy of distance and patience can work well, or simply bring a Wraith tank. The more I think about Savo Highway, the more I think it competes as one of the best vehicle levels in the series, and perhaps my favorite level in Halo 3. What is impressive is the way in which the player gets in a vehicle, gets out to fight with infantry, and gets back in, and it showcases one of the best aspects of Halo's combat. Unlike Outskirts or Metropolis from Halo 2, it does this tactic in far more complex and engaging ways. It is one of those levels that, probably most importantly, reveals Bungie's ability to use the Xbox 360 hardware in ways they could not with the original Xbox. And now on PC, at high resolution and frames per second, the game is able to reveal its best qualities on an even wider technological context.
Lord Hood, we made it.
Music to my ears, Commander. What about the Ark?
Fully uncovered, sir.
And we don't have much time. Marines, the Prophet of Truth doesn't know it yet, but he's about to get kicked right off his throne. You will take our city back and drive our enemy into the graves they've been so happily digging. One final effort is all that remains.
Chief, the Prophet of Truth has found the Ark. Our only chance of stopping him is a surprise aerial assault. Clear this sector of Covenant anti-air defenses. Make a hole for the Admiral's ships. Good hunting. Keys out.
The Storm, Halo 3's fourth playable mission, continues the seamless transition between vehicle and on-foot fighting with a big twist. A Marine convoy of warthogs gathers behind a series of locked tunnels that the Chief has to open from the other side. Similar to Truth and Reconciliation, opening the doors early is a risk, but can aid the player if it works out. Or, to keep the Marines safe for later, the Chief can kill everyone and open the doors when the player is ready. In such tight quarters, with grunts who love throwing grenades, these tunnel sections can be exceptionally dangerous, as the warthogs cannot evade. Fortunately, much of the Halo arsenal performs well in these close quarters settings, and the player once again has the height advantage for the first encounter. The following section is a much larger tunnel that includes more than just grunts and jackals. There is a highway walkway to the right which offers an opportunity to stay out of line of fire of the warthogs behind, as well as offers some cover. In these rooms, grenades are king, so dual wielding would be ill-advised. At the end, a couple of ghosts are parked and are encouraged to be used in the following outdoor set piece. The Ghost has received only minor tweaks in its feel from Halo 2 to Halo 3. Its boosted speed still makes it one of, if not the, fastest vehicles in the game. This gives it great power to run over enemies, which the level design encourages in this dry dock. This outdoor scene is large and, once again, presents many options for completion. The player must eliminate anti-air wraiths, a new variant of wraith that the player, unfortunately, is unable to pilot in the Bungie series. The player can use a sniper rifle tucked away in the dry dock building in the center, or the player can ride around as a ghost, destroying infantry and whittling away at the wraiths. Or the player may go on foot and board the wraiths without their awareness. This is yet again another great set piece that offers choice. 4 players and co-op have plenty to do here, especially if they up the difficulty. One of the benefits of 4-player co-op that I hope you see is not only the idea of 3 of your friends playing with you against a common enemy, which is the collaborative type of gaming that I prefer, it also has knock-on effects on single player. Each location in a game with 4-player co-op should take co-op into account, and that means a wider canvas with a larger amount of options. I think even in Halo 3, not all spaces do this, and I can imagine that in 4-player co-op, things can get rather tight in the tunnel sequences we just enjoyed. For levels like Cortana, I cannot even imagine. So it is not a perfect theory, but I hope you can see how, in expansive outdoor sections, the benefit, compared to Halo 2, is immediately apparent. One of the improvements we have not spent as much time with is in backdrops and skyboxes. In Halo 1 and Halo 2, much of the level design kept us from enjoying large vistas. In Halo 1, this was because of high cliff sides that kept the player in the level, but seeing the Halo ring was a sight to see on the original Xbox. For Halo 2, there are occasions where the game would open up into larger artistic scenes. The gondola ride on the level Regret, and the lowering of the shield on the gondola ride again for the Levo Quarantine Zone are 2 examples. In Halo 3, There are several moments where there are not only larger skyboxes, but there are several aerial vehicles in them, and sometimes they are engaged in combat. Here you can see a much better approach to the problem that Bungie faced in Cairo Station, where a player rarely saw the experience they wanted them to see. Here, with more space, the game is presenting a much more layered and complex scene to make the campaign feel alive. Up close, we fight off Covenant forces. In the slight distance, we can see Phantoms drop off vehicles and infantry. And in the distance, we can see Covenant ships flying towards the Ark. The amount of depth in each scene is dramatically increased compared to Halo 2. Even in Halo 1, as much as I love the game, there are a few moments where I would say events occur in the distance. Sometimes escape pods are entering the Halo Ring's atmosphere to crash land. Sometimes Foehammer is dropping off people in Assault on the Control Room. Sometimes Foehammer is getting shot down when trying to pick us up. But these moments are no match for Bungie's competence and grip on their engine for Halo 3. Just when you think the scene was packed enough, Banshees and Hornets can enter the fray. I'll speak more about Hornets when we get to the mission titled The Covenant. For now, it's back into the tunnels after the final Wraith is destroyed. Here the complexity of the first tunnel is higher with some doubling back upper levels, but it helps to mix things up a little in terms of variety. We witness that again when, as the player is about to activate the door to open the next tunnel, drones appear to stymie them. This is the second time that drones have entered the scene at the completion of a set piece. Here the verticality of the room can make it difficult for a Warthog turret to aim high enough. Luckily, drones seem to go down much faster in Halo 3 than Halo 2, even on heroic difficulty, which means that Bungie probably realized that their movement and health were likely a little too much to ask of the player. Cortana is back again with another annoying interlude, before we jump on the new human vehicle, the Mongoose. The Mongoose is a great transport vehicle that can reach places fast. It has no offensive capabilities of its own, but a passenger can ride behind with a weapon, which makes it great when combined with certain high-powered weapons like rocket launchers. Unfortunately, for the next encounter, a player is encouraged to have a Marine on the back, as they have unlimited rockets, while a player only has a small amount, and has to also reload. Like the Warthog, the chance to roll over in the Mongoose is quite high. In this set piece, the player once again starts out in a higher vantage point, enough to see the industrial wall on the far side, as well as the micro-terrain below that the Mongoose maneuvers around well. With little debris in the way, and smooth transitions and inclines and declines, this is an excellent setting for getting used to the Mongoose's controls. This area can be quite difficult if a player finds themselves stuck against a Ghost or Chopper, and their Marine misses their shots and has to reload. Like a Warthog, moving in circular clockwise or counterclockwise directions helps to mitigate that problem. While the Mongoose saw better light in competitive multiplayer, I'm grateful for this moment. In Halo 3, we have fought in a jungle, an underground base, a highway, and through an industrial dry dock. So far, we have piloted numerous vehicles in a variety of set pieces, and we have had the opportunity to plan out and execute a number of fights in both close and long ranges. While the tone is far more bombastic and melodramatic compared to the previous games, the mechanical variety here in fights is beyond dispute, and that is especially going to be true here. Not only does the game give us a new vehicle, it puts out yet another set piece in the form of a Scarab. In the previous game, we talked about Bungie's aversion towards the Scarab fight, most likely lamenting the way it plays out as an infantry fight, rather than as genuine problem solving. Here we see Bungie silencing critics in two key ways. One, the Scarab exists in the context of the level, giving players a couple ways of destroying it, but still leaving it for the players to fight on their own terms. The second silencing is in terms of boss fights. Here is a boss fight that lives up to the power of Halo's combat. If you happen to be on foot as the Scarab tank crawls over the wall, the spectacle is jaw-dropping. Games in 2022 rarely do this, much less in a playable action sequence, but a Scarab tank also demands several technical challenges from the player as well. If a player is going to get on the tank from below, the legs must be damaged enough for the Scarab to turn red and enter a maintenance mode. This lowers the carriage enough for a player to jump on. Another method concerns riding an elevator up to the cranes of the dry dock and jumping off from there. With 4 players, this segment becomes infinitely enjoyable. One downside to the fight, I think, is that the Scarab only has one weak spot. I think it would have been much better for the game to have several weak spots that must be addressed. The one weak spot we have can be shot at in later missions without ever having to board it. So we have a Step 1 and Step 2, but it feels like the Scarab lacks a Step 3. Getting off of the Scarab is a fun Step 3 in single player, but is not required in co-op, unless the Iron Skull is turned on. The Scarab is a formidable adversary, with a main gun, a top gun for anti-aircraft purposes, and a slew of infantry on board. Its legs can crush a player if they are not careful. Seeing Marines and players interact with all of these, as rockets fly and plasma scorches, is one of the best moments of Halo thus far. It is, in my mind, one of those moments where a developer addressed a problem in such a compelling way that it led to the benefit of the games in the future. It is so good that Bungie would never again really address a mechanic of this magnitude, even and especially in their later Destiny franchise. Why they could not tighten their shooting mechanics in a space fantasy setting while also broadening the scope of what they were good at, I do not know. The Spider Walker tank in Destiny is no comparison. More impressive is that this is not the end of the level. The storm keeps going as the Marines, the Chief, and Arbiter battle their way to more anti-aircraft guns. These larger warehouses we will see used again in Floodgate, the following mission. Here the best feature about these warehouses is in the amount of physical objects that can get thrown around. One of the obvious improvements in the game, as they have progressed, has been in physics systems surrounding objects. Here, barrels, roadblocks, cardboard boxes all fly around and respond, adding more to the embodied feeling of the levels. Replayability in games is not just about what your mind consciously enjoys, and physics objects like this are a good case of your mind only recognizing it when it factors into a fight. But of course, obviously, what we don't realize is that it always matters. In a game with projectiles and shooting, these physical objects abound, stopping rounds and occasionally impeding the player. This especially comes up when we have enemies like hunters, who respond to physical objects by striking them and sending them flying. This could kill the player. All of this feels intuitive by the player, and the mind accepts it, even if it does not acknowledge it. This is me attempting to acknowledge it. Hunters have seen a massive improvement yet again in deadliness. From their first pathetic capabilities in Halo 1, now they present a very real threat to a solo player. In co-op, like many fights in video games, pulling aggro allows for another player to land their shots on the hunter's weak spot along its back. But hunters now fight effectively with enemies to their front, sides, and even rear. Their melee attacks are accurate, and their cannons just as deadly as before. While the player has been able to use the warehouse to climb up onto boxes and use height, here are players likely to have to go toe-to-toe against the hunters. Hunters now feel like a boss fight as well. We head back outside. The loading dock has platforms left and right to get us out of a slight height disadvantage, but the next section is largely linear. This culminates in a push towards anti-aircraft turrets. There's a lot less to say about this engagement. We have an open expanse approaching the fight, but several rock piles allow the player to maneuver around the center, and eventually the player needs to shoot the aircraft cooling system as it vents heat. What I instead would like to talk about is the objective of destroying anti-aircraft systems and activating anti-aircraft systems throughout the remainder of the series. This is used often in this mission and will arrive again in Halo Reach. Compared to objectives like rescue Captain Keyes or reach the control room of Halo, these mission objectives can seem rather below the Master Chief's pay grade. In Halo Reach, many of the objectives feel like homework assignments, given the caliber of characters we are meant to inhabit. I think if the Halo series would have continued, we could have expected more games that attempted to provide smaller objectives in more tactical settings. One might imagine a future where Halo could have gone into roguelike territory, with procedural missions that players could be graded on based on their performance, where other players could have entered that seed to try out that mission. The combination of weapons, vehicles, skulls, difficulties, and enemies, and their AI behavior would have been perfect for this sort of randomized slot machine scenario. Here at this moment, we have Master Chief effectively saving the known universe by blowing up wraiths. Though our admiration for the Master Chief increased with each installment, Bungie had less and less to do with him. He eventually receded into the background of his own story. I think the first game does so much to establish a tone and atmosphere that the narrative is able to keep up with, and I just cannot say that here. Even though gameplay has been made so much more compelling and articulate in nearly every way, it cannot improve on its original promise and combat evolved. This exploit I'm about to use, I found for this commentary the first time I noticed, but an astute player can see the anti-air turret cooling mechanism from the beginning of the set piece and can snipe it, thus removing the set piece.
All ships, fire at will.
This is the way the world ends.
What did Truth just do? Did he activate the rings?
No, sir. But he certainly did something.
Evac wounded and regroup. Wherever Truth went.
Sir, new contact slipping in.
What is it? More brutes?
Worse.
The Flood have arrived on Earth in one of the most awkward missions in the Halo series thus far. We have seen two-part missions, like in Halo 2, which used similar artistic features if it did not reuse assets, and we have seen reused levels in Halo 1, like for example Assault on the Control Room and 2 Betrayals, but separated from each other by other levels and from daytime to night. But here Floodgate appears to be part 2 of the Storm, as well as reusing the level of the Storm, and I think the level suffers for it. One might have imagined some space between these levels, perhaps something in a Covenant ship in between, but no. Between the end of Sierra 117, Crow's Nest, Savo Highway, the Storm, and Floodgate, we've seen a lot of beiges and grays, and that continues here. The level certainly tries to darken the mood by making it an evening mission into night, with a moody and terror-stricken tone, but we have seen the Flood before, so we know what to expect. But we have not seen Flood quite like this. Halo 3 has the Flood changed more extensively than ever before. The Flood are more organic and can change into various types depending on what is needed. Heavier Flood types can withstand impacts, one would think, far better, and lumber around with asymmetric limbs. We have our standard anthropomorphic types, as well as carriers, but we also have a crawling type that can change into a spine turret shooter, which can also stick to walls and ceilings. Ironically, the Flood have evolved to be more like the Covenant, and their types help to address the Flood's problems in long-range encounters, as well as short-range melee scenarios. One other cool feature is the ability for the Flood to inhabit and change their hosts instantly, which they do with the Brutes here in the first scenario. We have the advantage, as the Flood are pooled together in one group, making them much easier to kill. This helps to introduce the player slowly to these new mechanics. Compared to the previous missions, this is one of only a couple of missions where the Chief and Arbiter are quite alienated. In Sierra 117, Marines are with the two for a large portion of the time. In Crow's Nest, Savo Highway, in the Storm, and the Ark, and the Covenant, Marines are everywhere. Here in Floodgate, that sense of alienation returns. Nothing tops the feeling from the first game, where in 343 Guilty Spark and the Library, we encounter the Flood for the first time, and without Cortana. But this shift at least pulls on that sense of atmosphere a little harder. Once again, where the assault rifle should be the weapon to bring down the Flood, it somehow manages to fall short. Other weapons that we have used before end up being our mainstays. This is a shame because, as far as I can see, the amount of Flood enemies on screen has come back to our Halo 1 levels. In the Library, the amount of Flood rushing towards the player was terrifying. Somehow Halo 2 could never maintain those levels, likely due to the load on the game as it was. Here in Halo 3, Flood are everywhere, and will even fan out and surround the player to add a sense of challenge. In Halo 3, the shotgun not only kills Flood quite easily, but it can also destroy the body, a nice improvement that puts it on par with the Elite Energy Sword. In a bizarre addition, the Chief can now use a flamethrower. This weapon is held like a detached turret, and fires flames that light up the screen and darken everything around it, which was one of those new features in video games to address contrast when moving in and out of outdoor environments inside. It was a way to simulate a human's eye adjusting. I have always considered the flamethrower to be a kind of death trap, and have died using it more times than I can count. Flood on fire lunge towards the player, and stepping in it hugely damages the Chief. Using it in multiplayer for area denial makes sense, but here in the campaign it is little use, and I typically ignore it for weapons that do not get me killed. Floodgate attempts to bring back that sense of dread from 343 Guilty Spark, as Marines sit in corners speaking in garbled and horrifying tones to themselves. The mission also sees the return of elites, who we have not seen in force since Halo 2. The elite leader Artyom is back and helps the player eradicate the Flood likely following the flood to Earth in an attempt to hold back the tide.
This is the carrier, Shadow of Intent. Clear this sector while we deal with the flood.
One awkward tidbit about playing against the flood is in the physics of their body part. Sometimes they roll around indefinitely, not stopping under any circumstances, which is a janky side effect of their physics engine run amok. Still, I felt as though I should mention it. While I am fighting the flood, we can speculate on what the improvements were, if any, to the drastic change in the flood. Why did Bungie feel as though they needed to change the formula on such a one-note enemy? And did these changes add any new notes? The enemy variety of the Covenant is robust. The multiple heights of the Covenant, as well as simple AI for each type, combine to form a force that holds its own as one of the best enemies to fight in all of shooters. Like Doom, the question of when to push and when to evade is given to the player in the form of projectiles. Like Pinky Demons in Doom, some melee enemies will duck and weave, but always attempt to pin the player down in smaller and smaller sections of geometry. Rechargeable shields make fights more forgiving, but it also allows for more risk. Doom 2016 invited glory kills in order to incentivize risk-taking in a post-shields environment. Knowing all of this context, what does this drastic change in the flood provide? One obvious change is the turret, which can fire from a large distance and from an elevated position. This is a novel change and can aggravate the player. The spines are not quite as lethal, but they do force the player to react eventually. So I think this change is an impressive one. Similar to problems with drones, I feel as though the crawling type that quickly morphs into other types is a misstep. We already had spores crawling on the ground, which lower the player's eye on occasions, but spores also were relatively easy to kill and move slowly in a floating manner. These crawlers move faster than spores and can really annoy the player for how many hits they take. Why they had this intermediary form between the other types I do not understand. The larger and bulkier form seems intimidating, but against a shotgun, or sword, or brute shot, players can eliminate them pretty much instantly. The larger types lumber unassumingly towards the player, and as long as a player maintains their distance, can be fairly harmless. Sure, they can soak up bullets and grenades, but they can also be avoided. This is never the case with our original Flood, who moved at greater speeds than the player. As you can see, I'm quite torn. I'm impressed that Bungie never rested on their laurels. But if the changes do not produce a novel and more comprehensive fighting scenario, then what does it prove? Who would have thought that a player could run away from the Flood? In the case of turrets and the big lumberers, we have to concede that they do not necessarily have to be disposed of. Compare this to the Flood-wielding rockets in Halo 1. It was clear that Bungie was tired of the one after another fighting style of the Flood, where players had to methodically deal with the Flood like zombies in a line. But to me, this decision was not quite it. If you ask me, perhaps an aerial type of Flood in the form of another bug or wasp might have been interesting, or we might imagine a queen type that could run around and lay eggs that would sprout into Flood, but would flee when attacked. Instead of going more complex, perhaps they could have gone even simpler, and added volume instead. Hundreds of Flood in a scene could have been just as effective at making the Flood distinct. Halo 3 in my eyes is not necessarily a straight line of improvement. One of those is its structure and story. Another one is the Flood. By Halo 3, the Flood have, in my eyes, weakened into a farce. Master Chief goes into the heart of the beast to retrieve Cortana, seeing that it is only a message, but it foreshadows the later mission, also titled Cortana, where we will see the Flood again.
Your voice with mine, and sing victory everlasting.
Chief.
Cortana?
High Charity, the Prophet's holy city is on...
Cortana.
Reclaimer. I must act quickly before your construct suffers any further
Wait.
trauma.
Leave her alone.
If we do not take this device to a safe location, somewhere I can make repairs.
On Halo, you tried to kill Cortana. You tried to kill me.
Protocol dictated my response. She had the activation index, and you were going to destroy my installation. You did destroy my installation. Now I have only one function, to help you, Reclaimer, as I always should have done.
live, Oracle? Can it be saved?
Uncertain. This storage device has suffered considerable trauma. Its matrices are highly unstable.
Perhaps one of our technicians.
That will not be necessary.
Chief.
Success!
High Charity, the Prophet's holy city is on its way to Earth, with an army of Flood. I can't tell you everything. It's not safe. The Gravemind, it knows I'm in the system.
It's just a message.
Let it play.
But it doesn't know about the portal, where it leads. On the other side, there's a solution, a way to stop the Flood, without firing the remaining Halo rings. Hurry, Chief. The Ark. There isn't much time.
I'm sorry.
No matter, Oracle. We've heard enough. Our fight is through the portal. With the brutes and the bastard truth.
Fine. We'll remain here. Hold out as long as we can.
Did you not hear? Your world is doomed. A Flood army, a Gravemind, has you in its sights. You barely survived a small contamination.
And you, shipmaster, just glassed half a continent. Maybe the Flood isn't all I should be worried about.
One single Flood spore can destroy a species. Were it not for the Arbiter's Council, I would have glassed your entire planet.
Sir, with respect, Cortana has a solution.
Cortana? Did you see her condition? How damaged she is? She could be corrupted for all we know. Her solution could be a Flood trap.
We should go through the portal. Find out for sure.
What we should do, Commander, is understand, clearly, that this is humanity's final stand. Here, at Earth. We go, we risk everything. Every last man, woman, and child. If we stand our ground, we might just have a chance.
No. If your construct is wrong, then the Flood is already won.
I'll find Cortana's solution. And I'll bring it back.
Earth is all we have left. You trust Cortana that much?
Sir. Yes, sir.
This is either the best decision you've ever made or the worst. Hell of it is, Chief. I doubt I'll live long enough to find out which.
Brute ships, staggered line. Shipmaster, they outnumber us 3-1.
Then it is an even fight. All cruisers, fire at will. Burn their mongrel hides.
True ship isn't taking part in the attack. He must have gone to ground.
Roger that, ma'am. We're on him. Kick the door. That's something. Do it while you can, Marines. As soon as we land, we're right back to it. Priority 1. Secure a landing zone for the commander's frigate. Keep your eyes and ears open. We need all the intel we can get. Wherever the hell we are. Stand to, Marines. Hoorah! Go, go, go!
One place where Halo 3 excels is in environment types. Compared to the other games, Halo 3 features cold mountains and hot deserts and dense jungles, giving the game a richness that allows its color palette to shine through. The story takes us through a portal, much like Halo 2, and we enter a massive installation that rivals and perhaps outpaces a Halo ring. When we arrive in the mission, we are told to eliminate more anti-air assets. By the end of the Halo series, anti-air assets will turn into a sort of fetish for Bungie, a get-out-of-jail-free card for certain actions. There's not much to say about these early set pieces, except for the Phantom attempting to construct an anti-air gun and often messing up. I do not know if this is an intentional programming problem or an accident, but whatever the Phantom is doing is so bizarre. Another thing to notice is the comparison between these initial sniper scenes and Truth and Reconciliation. Though one takes place at night and the other in broad daylight, much of this scene is the same, with the Chief taking up a sniper spot over enemies who are unaware of the player's presence. Bungie remixed the Ark level, combining Truth and Reconciliation with Assault on the Control Room. Once again, the player has the height advantage in both of these scenes. Eventually, the player will fight a pair of hunters before going uphill. A brief moment indoors transitions us into the next vehicle section. Once again, the player enters at high ground to get a vantage point of the scenario and to fire the first shot. A downed Pelican is somehow already here and has human weapons and ammo in a way that feels very much like Halo 1. We are introduced to Prowlers for the first time. Prowlers are the brute answer to the Spectre and Warthog, with the driver's seat and gunner seat switched from front to back, and vice versa. It's an awkward vehicle and floats on several what look to be skis, and there are two side seats much like the Spectre for infantry to ride along with. What is surprising is the plasma turret on top. One would have imagined that a brute vehicle would sport a harsher projectile weapon like a spiker, or something akin to the chopper turrets. It's a minor point, but there it is. The next section is a valley, and yet again the player is given one end of the valley as a starting spot. The fighting with a Prowler has the player up against choppers and ghosts. The Prowler, like the Spectre and Warthog, can shoot and drive in independent directions, so evasive maneuvers are once again incentivized. The player may also have the opportunity to pick up a rocket launcher, which has seen its design revert back to a more Halo 1 approach, as it has no lock-on feature, though the rockets seem to travel faster. As such, it is a higher skilled weapon now, which, as I have mentioned, is something I prefer. This has also perhaps had the knock-on effect of making vehicles in Halo 3 a stronger component of campaign and multiplayer because of this weakening of weapons. Don't worry, we haven't talked about the Spartan laser yet, so that statement comes with caveats. Once the player has dispatched these enemies, the next section is a huge expanse with a dip in the middle, higher terraced pathways on the left, and a Forerunner building and entrance on the right, inaccessible unless the player goes around. The player can choose a safer path on the left or fight it out in the kill zone below. A barricade checkpoint exists right at the place where the sand meets Forerunner architecture and grunts away with fuel rod cannons for any foolish drivers. The player is thus encouraged to take each encounter one at a time, to go the choppers out onto the field out of range of the checkpoint, and to only then proceed. However, what is also interesting about this section is how there is a path to the right that leads further into the level. The player is expected to fight and to double back to this location later. Here we come across a group of Marines fighting off a large Covenant force of grunts with fuel rod cannons, brutes, and jackals. The gloves have come off for Bungie by the time of the Ark mission, and many enemies have received boosts to their fighting ability, and the numbers of enemies have increased substantially. Similar to other scenarios, we have a U-shape where the player can strafe back and forth while their turret gunner shoots inward. The player goes through a tunnel, exiting at the high point of an arena. Far in the back, the player can see an anti-air Wraith tank, but in front of the Chief are several winding paths leading towards them, with various routes blocked off with either standard Wraith tanks or checkpoints. On the left, a gravlift tower stands at a corner of a bending path, and to the right there is a tank and a shade turret. The penultimate encounter is a group of brutes hunkered down in a naturally formed bunker of sorts, immaculately designed to be frustrating for the player, as the valley cannot reach from the front, and so the player must circle around. Circling around exposes the player to wraith fire, so we have here a challenging application of all the tricks we've learned from both the Ark as well as Savo Highway. I think this set piece is quite brilliant, even if we can cheese it with the chopper by shooting everyone from a distance, which is probably what you're seeing here. Even if we have not gotten the sense of mystery from Halo 1, that feeling of exploration and alienation, we still get to have well-designed combat encounters, with the full thrust of the 360 technology, bringing us more enemies and wider spaces. Destroying all enemies rewards the player with an in-engine moment of forward unto dawn touching down and offering several Scorpion tanks. This is the first tank set piece, and it consists in doubling back to that Death Valley set piece with the Forerunner facility. The force of the ship's entry is enough to scatter all kinds of objects and vehicles, which is an excellent detail. Here, 3 Scorpion tanks and a Warthog all join the fight, piloted either by players or Marines. The sheer scale of this in comparison to either of the previous Halo games is miles higher. Here this feels like an actual offensive push by the Marines. If this could be done by the Xbox 360, part of me always wondered what Halo games would look like in the 2020s, with new technology pushing the envelope of console gaming. Unfortunately, gaming did not go in that direction. The new Scorpion, like the Wraith, has seen visual improvements as well as mechanical ones. The coaxial machine gun has now been replaced with a manned turret underneath. Marines can still take up their suicide pact by sitting on the corners of the plating on top of the tank treads. The following set piece with these amount of vehicles is a rather amazing combination of fighting, with Wraiths on the far side, choppers and ghosts aggravating the player close up if they can reach, as well as shade turrets recently installed by Phantoms. Here the player has a very real opportunity to destroy a Phantom, if he or she chooses. I usually try and cut deaths from my playthrough, so as to make the viewing experience a little more faster paced and smooth for you, the viewer, unless the death reveals something interesting or problematic. Here I'm going to get nailed ruthlessly by a Marine driving a Gauss Warthog. Though we've seen big improvements in friendly AI, the game has so much going on that sometimes the Chief loses to a Warthog's treads, and you just kinda have to shrug and laugh. Nice work, buddy. The next set piece has Bungie one-upping themselves by having a Scarab tank again climb over the player's perspective, but we also have a continuation of both friendly and enemy vehicles engaging in combat. Just as before, Bungie is very careful, even if the Scarab is climbing over the Chief, to have the player at a high point so as to enjoy the detail of combat below. If we were to attempt a kind of cinematographic analysis of Halo 3, this vantage point philosophy is the most coherent aspect. Each set piece is positioned so as to force the player to experience the spectacle of what they are about to wade into. It is like climbing to the first drop in a roller coaster and getting a brief glimpse of the entire edifice at once, before rapidly plunging down. This is a very different philosophy of combat to Halo 1, which focused less on spectacle with each mission, and more on providing variety and mystery. Halo 2 sacrificed pace in favor of exposition and story, which meant stifling the player in the form of gondolas and elevators. You can see a sort of game design language in each campaign begin to take shape, but only in hindsight, as we are now, are we able to compare each of them in relation to another. In this massive set piece, the Chief is again offered a vehicle, this time a Gauss Warthog. In Halo 2, the introduction of the Gauss Warthog was short-lived due to its power. Here the Gauss Warthog is still a dominating presence on the field, and its projectile has seen a visual uplift, but placed in the context of a massive vehicular encounter, and the player, or players, have an opportunity to stretch its legs a little more. Previously, the Gauss Warthog was great, but was so overpowered that it had to be contained in a short section. Here the distances of fighting, as well as the sheer volume of enemies, give the Gauss Warthog what it needs, in the hands of a veteran player, with perhaps another player at the gunner seat. The Gauss Warthog can be more effective than a Scorpion tank in this set piece. There's so many Wraiths bearing down on the Marines, lobbing their plasma mortars with indirect fire, and the Scorpions are far slower. Combined with several Brutes farther downhill carrying fuel rod cannons, and what you have is a recipe for disaster. The faster Warthog with such effective firepower is the dominant solution in my eyes. This is equally true when facing the Scarab. The arena has a construction in the middle with ramps, where at certain angles, a player can use a vehicle like a Warthog, Chopper, or Ghost, and jump onto the Scarab, which, unlike beating the hell out of the Prophet of Regret, is very badass. Another Scarab fight so soon after the previous one may be a case of diminishing returns, and it might start to feel that way once the player has to defeat 2 of them later on in Halo 3. But for now, the pleasure of having the Scarab as a part of this massive vehicle set piece makes up for that.
The following interior locations bear a striking resemblance to Silent Cartographer, and with some looking to be an homage by being exactly the same, but with an obvious visual facelift. This is a good thing, as Bungie seems to be finally acknowledging some of the benefits of the level all those years ago.
That's our galaxy. We're beyond the rim.
2 to the 18th light years from Galactic Center, to be precise.
What is this place?
The Ark.
This is the Ark?
I had always assumed it was part of a shield installation, but it seems I was mistaken.
That's a first.
Not at all. While I had a complete understanding of Installation 04, my makers wisely limited my knowledge of all other strategic facilities. Compartmentalization, in case I was ever captured by the Flood.
Can you tell me where we are exactly?
Here.
And truth?
Near one of the Ark's supraluminal communication arrays, I'm afraid. Unfortunate. The meddler has triggered a barrier, a defensive perimeter around the Ark's core. The barrier will be difficult to disable. How odd that my makers would place such a comprehensive defense around a single... Oh my.
What is it?
Phantom!
Spark, move.
We must get past that barrier, or the meddler will destroy it all.
After a cutscene, the player continues fighting through interiors into a final section with brutes with jetpacks. The Ark, as a whole, is a spectacular middle with an awkward beginning and ending. When we think about tank set pieces, we can of course say that this set piece is one of the densest, with 2 opportunities for using a tank against unprecedented opposition. That said, the longevity of the Halo 1 tank set piece takes the cake, where a single tank is carried underground and back out again. The Scorpion has seen numerous improvements in its design that I think are unquestionably good things, though there is a case to be made for just how lethal the tank is with its increased fire rate and accuracy. I think, objectively, this is one of, if not the best tank sequences, but I hold a candle for the original one for just how long the set piece goes on for. The Ark is a mission that excels in its variety of encounters, vehicles, and sense of scale.
Commander.
Johnson, look sharp.
I got it.
No! Don't shoot. They mean us no harm. Those units have a priority task.
Oh yeah? And what might that be?
I really can't say. Not for sure. But if you allow me to find a terminal closer to the core.
We must keep the Prophet from our sides.
But what about your construct? Or solution to the flood? With more data,
Armor's right. We have priorities too. Until we kill Truth, stop the rings from firing, nothing else matters. Generators, and the barrier will fall?
A small section, yes.
Good enough. Johnson, drop the chief at the first generator, then head to the third. The elites will punch right down the middle.
Roger that.
Charlie, Foxtrot. Tower 1 approaches, active AAA.
Mayday! I can't control her!
Tell him down! Tell him down!
Brace yourselves! We're going in a little hot!
The Halo 3 campaign has odd pacing issues inside of it. On the Canon Rinse podcast episode for the game, which I highly recommend, they remark on the Act 3 feel to the entire Halo 3 game. What I was more fascinated by was the pairing of similar experiences and levels. Sierra 117 and Crow's Nest are 2 narrow infantry levels back to back. The Storm and Savo Highway are both slightly wider, small vehicle missions, and the Covenant and the Ark are 2 massive and sprawling vehicle and infantry missions. The Floodgate is the obvious one out, a thorn in the side of this usual dual mission structure. Why they decided to plan out the campaign in this way, rather than interlacing them like they did in Halo 1, I do not know. In any case, we have a similar callback to Silent Cartographer again, but this time in the form of a hot drop. We are introduced to the new Spartan laser, a mad weapon that can brutally destroy emplaced weapons and armor at vast distances. The Spartan laser has a very small total reserve, a total of 4 to 6 shots, but is immensely powerful once charged. A skilled player can begin charging the Spartan shot, only to peek out once near the firing point, thus minimizing danger to the enemy. In multiplayer, this was the terror of any vehicle in the sky or on the ground. Faster and smaller vehicles on the ground had a much better chance of maneuvering out of line of sight, but tanks were pretty much hosed. After this first engagement, the Chief is granted a Warthog, much like Silent Cartographer or Halo. This mission is a sort of greatest hits of the best of what Halo has to offer thus far, and might win for its total combat experiences for the general player for Halo 3. Banshees and Hornets patrol the skies, ghosts and mongooses orbit the player, and the player gets to initially climb uphill and further inland for a change. At the crest of the hill, entering the next event, the game gets to reveal some of its most beautiful scenery yet. A massive Forerunner installation, rolling hills, coniferous trees, a waterfall, and the Covenant have encampments throughout. Compared to the Ark mission, its experiences we've seen before, prowlers, wraiths, ghosts, shade turrets, but this incredible shift in environmental detail is such a great change than anything in the previous games. More than perhaps the previous games, a player may have little idea of what is going on. We do not really know why the Forerunner structure that led us to the Ark was on Earth, and we know little of the details of why the Master Chief is doing what he is doing in each encounter. Here it seems the player is fighting up the tower in order to disable a shield generator. Much of this interior fighting looks and feels like the previous Ark mission, so despite outdoor variety, indoor assets are very similar. One thing we should evaluate is the doubling back method of Halo 3. Since we have time, in Floodgate, the player turned and went back through the geometry of the storm, but in a different context. In the Ark, a player maneuvers through the desert waste in a lighter vehicle, only to come back in a Scorpion. At the end of the Ark, a player doubles back through interiors. Here in the Covenant, we make our way up to the first shield tower, but must travel back down again to reach the second tower. It sort of reminds us of the Silent Cartographer, but here I would suggest we analyze them for how they are different. In Silent Cartographer, we are on an island, and with the island, we can get back to places and other methods besides taking the same trek back. I should be clear, Halo 3's reuse of assets produces far better fights and outcomes than Halo 2's lack of reuse. If I had to choose between the two, it would be Halo 3 all the way. But the difference between Assault on the Control Room and 2 Betrayals in Halo 1 is a much starker contrast, yet reuses locations whole cloth. I think this comparison proves much better in Halo 1, and I think space between the two makes a big difference. Between the two levels, we have Guilty Spark and the Library, 2 flood levels without the presence of Cortana. The reuse of these spaces immediately in the Halo 3 levels is not terrible, but equally it lingers in our short-term memory. Remember, Halo 3 is shorter than Halo 2, and far shorter than Halo 1. To this day, I think that Halo 1 is the peak of environmental efficiency. It has a simple story, and it has a simple method for bringing a wide variety of engagements, and that makes for an extremely compelling campaign. Halo 3's complexity means reuse, but its reuse is a little more obvious.
Good work, Chief. That's 1. The Arbiter should be just about to... That's 2. It's all up to Johnson's team now. Get back outside, Chief. Wait for transport.
In risk of repeating myself, I'd like to spend a little more time on this, since I think it is the key difference between Halo 3 and Halo 1. In Silent Cartographer, one of the key benefits of that level, being an island, first has to be that a player can reach places they have been to before by other means. Going all the way around the island back to the beach we landed on is a big deal. Second, we get to see places that we know we can get to, but not from where the player is at the moment. If you recall, I remember saying that in Silent Cartographer, I critiqued how there was no way to reach the downed Pelican from the security building that holds the door mechanism to the map room. Here I'm going to have to eat my words. The player now knows that a downed Pelican exists on this island, which means that they can go back to the Warthog and drive around the island, giving the player a chance to feel success and learning the environment. In the Ark and in the Covenant, we can see that Bungie is explicitly trying to recreate that magic from Silent Cartographer in the way we double back, and also in some of the designs of the interiors. Unfortunately, Bungie learned the wrong lessons. In the Halo 3 missions, the only reason to move through these spaces is ensuing combat. Silent Cartographer felt like exploring. The characters know where to go in Halo 3. In Halo 1, Cortana speculates, quote, "Maybe they took cover in that structure. Let's check it out," close quote, implying that the mystery of where they are makes every encounter no guarantee that we are closer to ending the level. Another thing to keep in mind is that, when doubling back, there is only one path. Going downhill back to the shore we started on by using the exact route we took upward is not the same thing as what we did in Silent Cartographer. There is no learning, hypothesizing, or experimenting like in Silent Cartographer. Though Bungie continued to make Halo an action game, what I would perhaps rather have is more adventure. I do understand that this would place Halo closer to BioShock and Half-Life 2 than to something like Call of Duty, and leaning into adventure can sometimes make replayability diminish greatly, so it is a risk, but there it is. We are introduced at the bottom of the hill to the new human vehicle, the Hornet. A long time ago, in Halo 1, a Banshee could hover if a player held back on the analog stick. Since then, a hovering aerial vehicle was not as present. The Hornet is an answer to that question. The Hornet is a flyable aerial vehicle with a cockpit, 2 burners on either side for vertical liftoff and landing, 2 machine guns, twin rocket pods that lock on, and 2 side seats for those brave enough. Its hit-scan guns and extreme control over height and lateral movement make it an extremely effective aerial vehicle in both campaign and co-op, as the player can maintain a very long range while pelting them with machine gun fire. The rockets move slow in comparison, but track fairly well, making them great against Banshees and Phantoms. The more vulnerable cockpit of the Hornet perhaps contrasts to the Banshee, which hides the pilot in the back. Yet I cannot stress how lethal the Hornet is in the following engagement. It fully embraces one of the 2 strategies of Halo, which is to keep distance and methodically prioritize targets. The geography of the Covenant level matches Valhalla, a multiplayer map that emulates some of Blood Gulch from Halo 1. Bungie would start to use the same assets between multiplayer and the campaign in Halo 3, and by Halo Reach, it would not be just textures. While Halo Reach's campaign suffers in some ways, Bungie managed to maximize efficiency by including structures and geography in both firefight and multiplayer maps. Here in Halo 3, we have the use of desert and forest spaces in multiplayer, as well as the textures of interiors. Compare this to Halo 1, where Blood Gulch has no comparison in either structure or nature to anything in the campaign. Once a player enters the facility, they are greeted by a combination of hunters and drones, 2 groups that are found together often in future games. Why Bungie does this, I assume, has to be the juxtaposition between a hardy ground type and a fluid aerial type, which can cause a distinct problem for players in aggregate. The towers, of course, have the same geometry as well, perhaps predicting what an open-world Halo would really be designed like. Who can look at these towers and not think of something the Chief would have to climb in order to reveal more sections of a map? As much as we like the idea of Halo going open world, there is the counter-argument of wondering if Halo was meant to be an open world game. Many of the weapons, narratives, and ideas of Halo do not match the open world formula, so to take the form of Bungie's property and attempt to mold it into a new genre would take an extensive amount of thought.
Hit the switch, Chief, and the barrier will fall.
Now, Prophet, your end has come. My journey. By the gods, brace for impact!
After the Chief manages to lower the shields in the final tower, the Flood, of course, have arrived. From here they must push into the Citadel, which unveils yet another vehicle section. From Savo Highway, to the Storm, to the Ark, and finally to Covenant, there is a great case to be made in wondering how much time the Chief spends on foot versus in a vehicle. Compared to the other games, this must be the highest ratio. It's clear that Bungie, in making Halo 3 the big and bold ending to the trilogy, did what Lord of the Rings did, and turned every encounter up to 11. But the infantry combat of weapons, grenades, and melee, and the composition of enemy encounters, has largely been exhausted. We've seen great changes in scenery, and we have had the addition of new enemy types. But Bungie effectively chose vehicles as a way to broaden the scope of the engagements. The result is pretty amazing. Few games have been able to compete with this seamless transition to vehicles and back over and over again. The player has an opportunity, on approach to the Citadel, to use a Gauss Warthog, a Scorpion tank, or a variety of Covenant vehicles if they would like to board, and eventually a Hornet, all before the arrival of 2 Scarabs blocking the entrance. As much as I love seeing this from an aerial perspective, I think the level should have left Hornets unavailable for this final moment. The ease with which a player can shoot and destroy a Scarab from a Hornet really mitigates the power of this scene. Either that, or the Scarab needed to have multiple steps like we discussed before. There is a great deal of enjoyment to be had by players in lowering a Hornet and having the player jump on a Scarab from above. That should have been the first of many steps as they battled through this mobile weapons platform, destroying interior circuitry in several places. But in the context of 2007, these moments are pretty spectacular.
Stand firm. There are enemies crowd around us. We tread the blessed path. In a moment I will light the rings, and all who believe shall be saved.
Chief, how close are you?
Not close enough.
That the best you got? Oh, come on. Impress me.
Stop! You imbecile! He wants you to kill him. I'd prefer that you did not.
What's the matter, big shot? Can't start your own party?
I admit, I need your help. But that secret dies with all the
rest. Johnson, sound off.
Get out of here!
Not without you.
You delay the inevitable. One of you will light the rings. You cannot hope to kill them all.
You're right.
Do it. Me. Then you. Now. No!
Your forefathers wisely set aside their compassion, steeled themselves for what needed to be done. I see now why they left you behind. You were weak, and gods must be strong.
Not shoot, but listen. Let me lead you safely to our foe. Only you can halt what he has set in motion.
When the player makes it into the control room, the player is given a brief moment where they are allied with the Gravemind as a way to stop Truth from activating the rings. It's rather incredible how many times we find ourselves throughout the series in this moment, from 343 in the first game to Tartarus in Halo 2 to Truth now. Again, it's like poetry, so that they rhyme, we can hear George Lucas say. All that simply points to a lack of ideas. When we consider the plot of Halo, there is not much that we would say happens. After Halo 1, the pace of discovery grinds to a halt, save for when we have weird reveals like the Gravemind. Being allied with the Flood is a nice shock, but it is brief, and the action encounter is a straight line. These bridges also bear an incredible resemblance to the bridges in Assault on the Control Room, and the cutscenes which follow are, due to the limitations of the animation and facial detail, very cartoony. Miranda's death, as a result, does not land quite like her father's death did because of the way the animation is placed directly into our faces rather than her father's death off stage. For context, L.A. Noire would not come out until 2011, and The Last of Us in 2013. But the first Uncharted game came out in 2007, and certainly had better and more emotive faces than this. It's just not the best card in Bungie's deck at this point in time. So instead we have the aliens, a man in a helmet, and a floating robot do most of the talking. And that's good, frankly.
Stop the rings. Save the rest.
Can you see, Arbiter? The moment of salvation is at hand.
It will not last.
Your kind never believed in the promise of the sacred ring.
Lies for the weak, beacons for the deluded. I will have my revenge. On a prophet, not a plague.
My feet tread the path. I shall become a god.
You will be food, nothing more.
No! I am truth, the voice of the Covenant.
Asshole, you must be silenced. Headstones pushed aside. Corpses shift and offer room. A fate you must abide. We trade one villain for another.
Similar to the backtracking in previous missions, we fight our way out, crossing the same bridges and leaping down a chute. I suppose our alliance with the Flood was short-lived. I think these encounters both to the Citadel and back are very weak. When looking at the ends of some of these missions, we realize that they pale in comparison to Sierra 117. Why is it that the end of the Storm is a single narrow path to an anti-air turret? Why is the Floodgate an entire repeat in geometry of a level that came just before? Why does the Ark end with brutes wielding jetpacks? Why does the Covenant end with going back across the same bridge? Why does Cortana end with going back through High Charity the same way? We'll talk about endings, I suppose, closer to the endings of the following missions, but compared to the middle of these missions, it's a bit of a letdown. That being said, we have not spoken about the ebb and flow of missions all that often, so my critique comes from an admiration of the way Bungie can mix and match in Halo 3 to great effect. That is, until we get to Cortana.
What do you see? ring you destroyed.
When did you know?
Just now. But I had my hopes. What will you do?
Light it.
Then we are agreed. A tactical post will completely eradicate the local infestation. I will personally oversee the final preparations, though it will take time to fabricate.
How will you light it?
I'll round up our survivors, fall back to the dawn. Arbiter will do the same with the elites. Cortana's in there somewhere.
I suppose there is some poignancy here with the existence of a new ring. The Ark apparently is a massive factory that specializes in the creation of new Halo rings in the event that one is destroyed. Rather than destroy this ring, the Chief has the idea of lighting it, creating a localized burst which should eradicate the flood. This is a hilarious notion. A virus does not simply only spread in the region where the Gravemind is located. Any spores can propagate with the flood, so this plot point is an obvious loophole that came about with the invention of the Gravemind, as somehow a leader of the flood. The flood exists best in Halo 1 when there is no leader, and what is behind the flood is a void, an abyss, much like the Alien and Alien, where the only thing that keeps it going is an insatiable and hedonistic hunger. Genre pieces of art often fall prey to this problem, whether it is the existence of leaders for the White Walkers in Game of Thrones, or the Gravemind in Halo, or a mothership in, Independence Day. It represents such a cop-out. What makes the original Alien so horrifying is the presence without a creator, without any sort of internal coherence or logic to its existence. The Flood could have been the same, but no. I am delaying talking about the mission that is Cortana. Despite the fact that Cortana sits above the library in the community rankings of levels, I consider Cortana to be the worst level in the entirety of Halo's history. There are many reasons for this, so I suppose I should get started. For one thing, the excellent color palette of the previous levels takes a back step here. The organic and Covenant mixing does not blend so well, even though the player moves from organic to a progressively mechanical and purple structure. The movement between sequences is very difficult to parse out. Entrances and exits are tucked around corners and can be hard to find. Even then, the environment makes it difficult to get one's bearings. I do appreciate the awkward angled level design that makes the player feel uneasy. Often in Halo levels we can at least count on perfectly level platforms and floors, even if geometry goes up and downhill. But here it's a problem. The reason it is a problem is because the new flood types really utilize the geometry much better than the player. Spine shooters can post up on walls, the morphing types critter underneath players, and the anthropomorphic types can quickly surround the player, no matter where they are. Fortunately, the player has plenty of weapons to handle the flood, but like keys, a player can be overwhelmed easily. Another problem with the level is the progression. The Chief must get in, retrieve Cortana, and then escape, using almost the exact same path all the way to a pelican a player can see at the beginning of the level. At least in the library, a player goes up elevators to establish a sense of progress. At least in the library, there are a couple of established set pieces in terms of traversal, combat, and defense. By the midpoint of that level, it communicates its design to the players consistently. In Cortana, though, there are doors to signal the beginning and end of each section. However, there are also holes in the floor, and there are holes in the wall. There are moments where a player is simply supposed to know when to squeeze through openings in the Covenant ship, and for a first-time player, that can be maddening. The game sometimes will offer an objective marker, almost as an apology, for what they did to the player. And finally, after all this, the Gravemind and Cortana insist in having a conversation with the player by altering movement and spouting asinine dialogue, something that the library never attempted. In an action first-person shooter like Halo, Taking away agency from the player like this, and front-loading story, especially in such a melodramatic fashion, is pretty obnoxious. I can understand that there may be some lore implications in the dialogue between Cortana and the Gravemind, but in my mind, that is just an excuse for such poor and melodramatic fluff. If you're interested, go and read the transcript of this mission on the Halo fandom website for details, but the reality is that this mission could have all been handled better in a cutscene, where Cortana reveals that she has the index from the original Halo, which they can use to light the new one, and I think few fans would have wanted to see that in a playable level, especially with what we have here.
You found me. But so much of me is wrong. Out of place. You might be too late.
You know me. When I make a promise.
You keep it. I do know how to pick 'em.
Lucky me. Do you still have it?
The activation index from the first Halo ring. A little souvenir I hung on to, just in case. Got an escape plan?
Thought I'd try shooting my way out. Mix things up a little.
Just keep your head down. There's 2 of us in here now, remember?
Even with all this talking, even with the doubling back through the geometry, the mission is mercifully short. Sure, the graphics are an improvement from the previous games, and yes, the Flood have received an uplift in their look and design. But if all of that is for this mission, then I don't want it. Based on what I have mentioned, it is easy for me to deride this level, and to call it the worst in the series. I would much rather play the library, and even Keys, especially in the context of that campaign, and with those mechanics, than play this ever again. What is more frustrating is how, even after all this dialogue, Cortana seems to be just fine, which makes us wonder what the point of it all was. Once the player has Cortana, the Chief must destroy a reactor, which forces them to move dangerously out on crosswalks, while Flood attempt to knock the player off. Once the player does destroy the reactor, the coherence of the level, what's left of it, starts to explode, and it feels as though Flood arrive continuously until the player can get out. We've done this idea before in Crow's Nest, and briefly in the Mall from Halo 1, but not nearly in such an annoying way.
What else did you do?
We are aboard. Humans and elites. Will you not come with us, brother?
No. This is our fight. And I will see it finished.
Johnson, do you have the frigate?
Yes, ma'am. I'll land her as close to the control room as I can.
Safe is better than close, Sergeant Major.
Roger that. And ma'am, it's good to have you back.
Halo.
not exactly sure what will happen when we fire it.
We'll head for the portal, and we'll all go home.
Halo is thought of by the Halo community on tiermaker.com to be an S+ level, and honestly I do not see it. There are two major moments in the level, a fight to the control room, and the final Warthog drive to a ship. We have seen both of these before. The connective tissue in between is also problematic. We'll discuss it as we come to it. I remember speaking a long time ago about the design of the control room as a method for stringing out fighting by maximizing geometry. Well, here we have it in spades. Due to the design of the level, there is little chance to climb up the center strut like we did in the first game, unless the player is cheeky and willing to rocket or grenade jump. Speedrunners use this strategy to navigate up the terraces, but beginning and even veteran players may not know this. Regardless, players must hold the position until the door opens, something even Halo 1 would not do. All of this involves fighting the Flood, which simply do not have the wide enough breadth of combat encounters as the Covenant, especially after fighting in what appears now to be the climax in the Ark and the Covenant. It seems as though all the narrative choices of the game have made this culmination unavoidable. Though the beginning of this level feels thematic, like the Maw, as if we were at the end of the world, we briefly table that idea until we get into the Warthog. Just because Bungie could return to the control room doesn't mean they should have. If anything, the player should have sauntered in the same direction as Sergeant Johnson, and then left going down the control room to a Warthog in the distance, in a similar way to two Betrayals with the two Banshees. It's strange that these are reversed, but not as strange as you might think. The mission is, like Cortana, on the shorter side. If one were to remove the trek and firefight at the control room, there would only be roughly 6 minutes of the Warthog drive to the ship, which is moderately longer than the Warthog drive in the Maw, but not by much. If I had my way, the majority of Halo would be scrapped for a different approach. This is our last mission with the Flood in the entire series, so we should evaluate their presence. To me, the Flood was most prominent and successful in their reveal, design, presence, and application in Halo 1. That might seem surprising, but consider just how incredibly the movement was from Assault on the Control Room to 343 Guilty Spark. Obviously, the following levels with the Flood in the series simply cannot have a genuinely new reveal Flood, so that is a point towards novelty in Halo 1's favor. Next, we should realize that the library is the only level where we fight the Flood as the only enemy. In each level, there are at least other entities, be they Sentinels or Covenant, to draw the Flood's attention, and I suppose technically this happens in the library as well, if in a minor way. To some extent, this is rather true of many levels in the Halo series, but as you can see from my previous discussions on community rankings, the more Flood-centric a level gets, the lower its ranking. I think this is telling. When thinking about some of the experiences overhearing and overseeing the Flood and Covenant engage each other in Halo 1, the result is still neck-tingling. I still get excited and awed by the result. There's just something about the haunting nature of the Flood against the Covenant in Halo 1 that speaks to a profound story, as simple as it is. Other enemies fighting the Flood exist as a buffer to mitigate aggression against the player, which means, to some degree, that the Flood have to be simple onslaught that barrels towards the player. In Halo 2 and Halo 3, the Flood seem pathetically evasive in comparison. The changes to Flood in Halo 3 made them slower, bulkier, and as a result not nearly as terrifying. The inclusion of the Grave Mine in Halo 2 lowered the perceived narrative threat of the Flood, as we were exposed to a sentient creature who could reason and think. Bungie should not have done this, as it goes against the innate description of the Flood, and Bungie's choices to resolve the issues of the Flood in Halo 3 are just bad. If lighting the ring would blow up the Ark, are we really talking about the rings wiping out all sentient life, or, like, all matter in the universe? And if a local detonation did either, how is Master Chief still alive after being left behind? How, after High Charity and Earth, is the Flood eradicated? Bungie opened a Pandora's box with the Flood that they did not know how to close. So, because of all these narrative and mechanical choices, I am confident in suggesting that the Flood in Halo 1 were the best implementation, by a long shot. As you are sitting here watching me fight wave after wave, waiting for the door to open to the control room, I hope I have convinced you to agree with me.
Yank me, Chief.
I'm not gonna lose her, too.
Oh, hello. Wonderful news. The installation is almost complete.
Terrific.
Yes, isn't it? I have begun my simulations. No promises, but initial results indicate this facility should be ready to fire in just a few more days.
We don't have a few more days.
But a premature firing will destroy the Ark.
Deal with it.
Will destroy this installation. Unacceptable! Unacceptable! Absolutely unacceptable! Protocol dictates action! I see now that helping you was wrong! You are the child of my makers, inheritor of all they left behind. You are Forerunner. But this ring is mine. I take no pleasure in what must be done. You do not deserve this ring. I have kept it safe. It belongs to me.
Not for long. Kick his ass.
I'm getting you out of here.
No, you're not. No, don't let her go. Don't ever let her go. Send me out with a bang.
Chief, I'm so sorry.
Another piece of this mission that people seem to willfully ignore is the boss fight with the Monitor. This cutscene leading up to the fight, one that finally kills Johnson, and the fight itself, is pretty terrible. Consider the humorous origins and invincibility of Johnson, and now look at him as an integral part of the Halo experience, telling Master Chief to never let her go, in such a weird romantic way that Johnson felt towards Miranda. Miranda and Johnson, that's fine, but Cortana and the Chief? What even are the Chief's qualities? What even is his personality? Dry humor? And what exactly besides on-the-job experience do they see in each other? The fight with the Monitor, my god, don't get me started. The player is stuck in the control room with no cover, as they have been before, and is basically told to, by 343 Guilty Spark, to dance. We duck and weave back and forth, ignoring his laser attack, waiting, as far as I can tell, for Johnson to hand us his Spartan laser. Again, this could have been done in a cutscene, and if people could have had the opportunity to choose both, they would have chosen the cutscene. Alright, the Warthog escape. Obviously, it's a callback, which is endearing, but it's something we've done before. I had hoped that throughout the games they would continue to provide novel experiences, but if they had to repeat something, I suppose this is as good an activity as anything else. One of the improvements is in the Arbiter riding as gunner. In the first game, the player had no defensive measures besides the vehicle itself, so it's nice to have a passenger. Another improvement is the expansiveness of driving. The player has many opportunities to weave and slide as they have to maneuver a halo ring that is basically falling apart, though why it is, I'm not sure. Lighting a ring doesn't destroy a ring, as far as I know. It destroys sentient life, not everything. If I had to guess, I would say that lighting a ring so soon after construction can lead to some infrastructure collapse. Anyway, so there's that. I can see how it would be frustrating for people to fall into newly created holes that the player cannot predict. I think this is a bad side effect of the new mechanic, but it's not enough for me to want it gone. It is just too fun staying on my toes in case the path explodes in front of me. I think the 3 avenues of available travel in the tunnels is good for replayability and for choice. It's a nice touch to the first Warthog drive as well. Finally, the sense of scale and the amount of driving feels bigger and longer, giving some weight and speed to the driving experience. But at the end of the day, this journey of a Warthog drive is another attempt to come full circle, something that Bungie has loved doing, and perhaps to a fault. We've reached the end of the Halo trilogy, so I suppose as we finish the fight, we ought to evaluate the veracity and effectiveness of the campaigns as a whole. As irksome a narrative as Halo 2 was, I think it is slightly better than Halo 3, even with its weirdness. Halo 3's plot is sort of non-existent, much like endings of trilogies. The choice to wrap up Cortana and Chief is odd, considering that it never quite began, and the Arbiter's inclusion in Halo 2 meant very little in Halo 3, other than a different look for player number 2. Watching the ending of Halo 3, one is deeply shocked at how peaceful an ending it turned out to be. One cannot imagine that the Covenant and humans would coalesce so easily, unless we killed the Covenant who disagreed. The logical problems compound even in such a short experience like the Halo trilogy, that culminates into what I believe to be utter nonsense. So there is no question that the Halo 1 story has the best narrative. Its simplicity and mystery are still its best draws, and this manages to embed itself into the combat as the Chief exploring this brand new world. It would not be difficult to imagine a reboot to the Halo series, remaking the first game from the ground up, sometime in the future. I think Halo 3's combat is spectacular. Though I have a soft spot for Halo 1, Halo 3 manages to balance and tweak encounters to be just right, if a bit heavy weapon heavy. Equipment is a nice inclusion, but is not as tenable in the campaign for having redundancies in certain types, or having types that do not make sense. Thankfully, broken weapons in previous Halo games are either tweaked or used sparingly, and certain overpowered vehicles are balanced by sheer volume in vehicle set pieces. The movement from Savo Highway to Storm is stellar, as is the arc to the Covenant, but the flood levels in Halo 3 are dreadfully weak, even weaker perhaps than some flood sections of Halo 2. Halo 3 is most likely the absolute biggest and boldest the Halo formula could have gone. As you saw from those vehicle sections, one can feel the strain placed on Halo's original smaller and more infantry-focused encounters. With only light vehicle use, balloon into something too big and unwieldy to be used for long. ODST and Reach would opt for smaller stories with graphical and atmospheric twists, and I think this was the right decision, even if they were not executed quite as well. I think one disappointment I had with the trilogy, replaying it, was in wondering what Halo 2 and 3 would have been like if Bungie had learned different lessons. This is what I meant when I suggested this thought all the way back in the first commentary. What if Bungie had leaned into exploration, mystery, and an open, more adventurous genre that was applied to their established shooting mechanics? Perhaps something a little more in the direction of Half-Life 2 or System Shock 2 or Bioshock. Or even if Bungie wanted to continue making Halo an action first-person shooter, why didn't they improve the lessons of the first game? Halo 2 reused nothing, except perhaps an artistic design, in a twin mission structure that strung its art too thin. In Halo 3, Bungie did reuse spaces whole cloth, but either between missions, in the case of the Storm and the Floodgate, or within the mission itself, in very simplistic ways, like with the Ark, the Covenant, and Cortana. Bungie had a winning formula in the first campaign, in the way that they reused missions, but separated them by other missions, with totally different hooks. Why they ignored this, we might unfortunately never know. Instead, what we got was a series of dense combat encounters that, while great, continue in the direction of the bombastic. Halo would never again tap into that intrigue and mission variety that so propelled its first title. Something I wouldn't think would happen is this. That intrigue still propels me when I replay that first game. I have no idea why that works, because of course, I know what is going to happen, and yet there it is. When we come back to ODST, this will be an idea I'll come back to, but I wanted to mention it here as a touchstone. I still think Halo 3 is a great campaign, but in my mind it is not the best, and I think Halo 1 has a better chance of being remembered. This has been the end of the Halo 3 commentary. If you've made it this far, thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you next time when we take a look at the standalone expansion for Halo 3 in the form of ODST, released 2 years later. See you then.
Hang on! Chief!
If we don't make it,
We'll make it.
it's been an honor serving with you, John.
For us, the storm has passed. The war is over. But let us never forget those who journeyed into the howling dark and did not return. For their decision required courage beyond measure, sacrifice, and unshakable conviction that their fight, our fight, was elsewhere. As we start to rebuild, this hillside will remain barren, a memorial to heroes fallen. They ennobled all of us, and they shall not be forgotten.
Reset! Up!
I remember how this war started, what your kind did to mine. I can't forgive them. But you have my thanks for standing by him to the end. Hard to believe he's dead.
Were it so easy.
Things look different without the Prophet's lies clouding my vision. I would like to see our own world, to know that it is safe.
Fear not, for we have made it safe.
By your word, Arbiter.
Take us home.
Chief? Can you hear me? I thought I'd lost you, too.
What happened?
I'm not sure. When Halo fired, it shook itself to pieces. Did a number on the Ark. The portal couldn't sustain itself. We made it through just as it collapsed. Well, some of us made it. You did it. Truth and the Covenant, the Flood, it's finished.
It's finished.
I'll drop a beacon, but it'll be a while before anyone finds us. Years, even. I miss you.
Wake me when you need me.